My son banned me from his wedding, but sent me a bill for $180,000 to pay for his party and honeymoon. He even cheekily added a note saying, "Be thankful I let you contribute." I just smiled and turned his dream into a nightmare. Before I tell you how I destroyed his perfect day, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I am William Harrington. To my neighbors in this quiet Chicago suburb, I am just Bill, the retired truck driver who wears stained work jackets and drives a beat-up Ford truck from the 90s. I spend my mornings fixing old engines in my garage because I hate waste. My hands are always covered in grease and my fingernails are permanently dark with oil. My house is a modest two-bedroom ranch that has not been painted in 10 years. The gutters are a little rusty and the lawn is patchy. To the outside world, I am a man who barely scraped by, living out his final years on a meager Social Security check. It is the perfect camouflage. Nobody looks twice at an old man changing his own oil. Nobody suspects that the man collecting coupons at the grocery store is the former chairman of Harrington Logistics, a company I sold 5 years ago for $52 million. I kept it a secret because I wanted to know who loved me for me and who loved me for my bank account. I thought I knew the answer. I was wrong. I was tightening a spark plug on my old backup generator when a courier truck pulled up to my driveway. The brakes squealed, breaking the morning silence. A young man ran up the driveway with a thick envelope. Priority mail from Justin Harrington, my only son. I wiped my hands on a rag, leaving black streaks on the red cloth. I felt a small spark of hope in my chest. I had not heard from Justin in 3 months, not since he got engaged to Brittany, an influencer who looked at me like I was a stain on her designer carpet. I thought this was finally the wedding invitation. I thought my son was reaching out. I was naive. I opened the envelope right there in the cold garage. Inside was not a card with silver lettering. It was a document on heavy, expensive paper titled Wedding Protocol and Guest Regulations. I put on my reading glasses, the cheap ones I bought at the pharmacy. I read paragraph 1. It stated that due to the high-profile nature of the guest list, including the prestigious Vanderbilt family, certain family members would be excluded from the physical ceremony to maintain the aesthetic integrity of the event. Aesthetic integrity. That was a fancy way of saying, my father looks too blue-collar for my Instagram photos. I felt a tightness in my throat, but I kept reading. The second page was the real kicker. It was an invoice. A detailed, itemized bill. Venue rental at the Aspen Silver Peaks Resort, $50,000. Vera Wang custom gown, $15,000. Imported Ecuadorian roses, $20,000. First-class flights to the Maldives for the honeymoon, $30,000. The total due was $180,000. At the bottom, in Justin's handwriting, was a note in blue ink. Dad, since you cannot attend in person due to the dress code and social atmosphere, this is your way of being there. Be thankful I am letting you contribute to my happiness. Please wire the funds by Friday so we can finalize the deposits. I stood there in my garage. The smell of gasoline and old oil filled my nose. The hum of the refrigerator in the corner was the only sound. Most fathers would cry. Most fathers would call their son screaming, asking how he could be so cruel. I did neither. I walked over to the metal tool cabinet where I kept a photo of my late wife, Catherine. She was smiling in that photo taken the year we bought our very first delivery truck. We ate ramen noodles for 3 years to pay for that truck. I spoke to her picture. I said, Catherine, look at what we raised. He does not want his father. He wants his father's wallet. He thinks I am a helpless retiree who will sell his house to please him. He has no idea he is trying to hustle the man who survived union strikes, corporate raiders, and hostile takeovers. I felt a coldness settle in my chest. It was not sadness. It was the familiar icy focus of a businessman about to dismantle a competitor. I looked at the bill again. $180,000. He wanted a contribution. I would give him one. I put down the wrench. I picked up my phone. It was time to teach Justin a lesson about value that he would never forget. I dialed the number I knew by heart. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. I hung up and dialed again immediately. This was a test. If he was too busy to answer his father, he was too busy to receive a wire transfer. On the second try, he picked up. His voice was loud, surrounded by the clatter of silverware and ambient chatter. He was out to lunch, probably spending money he did not have yet. "What is it, Dad?" Justin asked. He did not say hello. He sounded annoyed, as if I had interrupted a crucial business meeting, though I knew his only business was keeping up appearances. "Justin," I said, making my voice sound thin and weary. I adopted the persona of the beaten-down old man he believed me to be. "I received your package, the letter, and the bill." There was a pause on the line, followed by the sound of him sipping a drink. "Oh, good. I am glad it arrived." "Look, Dad, I know it seems harsh. Brittany and I talked about it for a long time. The Vanderbilts are very particular people. They come from a different world than you. They are old money, high society. We do not want you to feel uncomfortable or out of place." He was not trying to spare my feelings. He was trying to spare his own embarrassment. He was ashamed of my grease-stained hands and my 10-year-old flannel shirts. He was ashamed of the father who had worked double shifts to pay for his private school tuition. "I understand, son," I said, forcing a tremor into my voice. "I never want to be a burden. But just in this amount. $180,000. That is everything I have. That is my entire retirement savings. If I give you this, I might have to sell the house." I waited for him to say no. I waited for him to say that was too much to ask. I gave him one last chance to be a human being. Justin sighed, an impatient, heavy sound. "Mom would want me to have the perfect wedding, Dad. And honestly, you should look at this differently. Brittany was not going to let you contribute at all. She thought it would look tacky if we took money from someone in your position. I had to fight for you. I had to convince her to let you have this honor. You should be grateful I am letting you play a part in my happiness. Just sell the house. It is a dump anyway. You belong in a smaller place. Maybe a condo. Just make sure the funds are wired by Friday. We have deposits to make." The line went dead. He did not say goodbye. He did not say, "I love you." He just gave me a deadline and hung up. I lowered the phone from my ear. The trembling in my hand stopped instantly. The hunch in my shoulders disappeared. I stood up straight in my garage, surrounded by the tools of my trade. The sad, lonely old man vanished, replaced by the shark who had eaten competitors for breakfast in the boardrooms of Chicago. He wanted me to sell the house. He wanted my retirement. He wanted to bleed me dry and discard the husk. I scrolled through my contacts and found a number labeled Leonard. Leonard was not just my attorney. He was the only man who knew exactly how many zeros were in my bank account. He answered on the first ring. Bill Leonard's gravelly voice boomed. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Justin just asked me for $180,000, I said calmly. "And he banned me from his wedding." I could hear Leonard shifting in his leather chair. "Say the word Bill. I will freeze the trust fund. I will cut his credit cards. I will make sure he cannot buy a pack of gum in this city without being declined. I will destroy him before lunch." "No," I said, walking out of the garage and into the bright, harsh sunlight of the driveway. "That is too easy. Pain that happens too quickly is not learned. It is just reacted to. I want him to feel safe. I want him to feel rich. I want him to climb so high that when he falls, he shatters." There was a silence on the line, then a low chuckle. "What are you planning, Bill?" "Do not block the transfer," I told him. "Prepare the paperwork. I am going to give him exactly what he asked for. But Leonard, I want you to look into the Vanderbilts. Justin thinks they are royalty. I have a feeling they are just court jesters. And get Mike on the line. I need eyes on my son. I want to know every move he makes. You're going to play with your food before you eat it. Aren't you? Leonard asked. I smiled at the empty driveway where my son used to play catch with me. I am not just going to play Leonard. I am going to put on a show. I walked into the Obsidian Lounge at exactly 2 in the afternoon. It was the kind of place that charged $12 for water and served coffee in cups the size of thimbles. I wore my faded tan Carhartt jacket, the one with the fraying patch on the left elbow, and my steel-toed work boots that left heavy dusty prints on the polished Italian marble floor. The hostess, a young woman with a headset, looked ready to call security the moment I stepped through the glass doors. She stepped in front of me, trying to block my path, assuming I was lost or looking for a handout. I did not stop walking. I owned the building. I owned the land it sat on. I signed the lease agreement for this very cafe 3 years ago, but to her and everyone else in this room, I was just an old man who had wandered in from a construction site. I spotted them in the corner booth by the floor-to-ceiling windows. Justin was wearing a suit that was too tight, a trendy cut, that made him look like he was trying too hard. Brittany sat across from him, glowing in the afternoon light. She looked like a porcelain doll, expensive, fragile, and cold. She saw me first. Her eyes did not light up with recognition. They widened with horror. It was the look you give a waiter who has just spilled soup on your dress. She did not smile. She did not wave. She simply nudged Justin under the table and gestured with her chin as if to say, "Deal with this." I walked up to their table and stood there. Neither of them pulled out the empty chair for me. Neither of them offered me a drink. I stood like a schoolboy called to the principal's office, while Brittany continued scrolling through a tablet propped up against a vase of orchids. She was talking about color palettes. She used words like ethereal and curated. She spoke about how this wedding wasn't just an event, it was a brand launch. She talked about getting featured in Vogue and how the lighting had to be perfect for her followers. Finally, she stopped and looked up at me. She did not say hello. She looked at my jacket and then down at my hands, which were resting on the back of the empty chair. I had scrubbed them, but 30 years of diesel and grease don't just wash away. My hands were rough-scarred and permanently stained with the dark lines of hard labor. "You are late," Brittany said, her voice sharp and clipped. "We are on a tight schedule. We have a meeting with the florist in 20 minutes, and I cannot be late." She sighed, looking at Justin as if my presence was a personal insult to her aesthetic. I started to pull out the chair to sit down, but she held up a hand to stop me. Her manicured fingers were adorned with the 2-carat diamond ring I had secretly paid for when Justin couldn't get approved for credit. "Before you sit down, Bill," she said, using my first name instead of Dad or Mr. Harrington, "please be careful. This is a cashmere throw on the seat. And honestly, you smell like a gas station." Justin looked down at his coffee, avoiding my eyes. He said nothing. He let her speak to his father like I was a stray dog. Brittany reached into her designer bag and pulled out a bottle of hand sanitizer. She slid it across the table toward me, not wanting to touch my hand. "And before you sign any of the checks or the contracts," she said, her lip curling in disgust, "make sure you go to the restroom and scrub those hands. I do not want grease stains on my wedding documents. This is a high-class event, Bill. We cannot have the smell of cheap motor oil clinging to our paperwork. It ruins the vibe." I looked at the sanitizer bottle. I looked at my son, who was pretending to be fascinated by the foam in his latte. I looked at the woman who wanted to spend my life savings on a party I was not allowed to attend. I sat down slowly, ignoring her warning about the cashmere. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table so she had to look at the grease under my nails. "Do not worry, Brittany," I said, my voice calm and low. "I will make sure everything is signed exactly the way it needs to be." I watched her recoil slightly from the smell of old oil and hard work. She thought she was humiliating me. She had no idea she was handing me the shovel to dig her grave. Justin cleared his throat, pulling the focus away from my dirty hands and back to the only thing that mattered to him, the money. He slid a sleek black folder across the marble table. It stopped right next to my elbow. Inside was the payment schedule for the venue and the vendors. It was a timeline of demands. "Dad!" Justin said, his voice dropping to that serious tone he used when he was trying to sound like an executive. "We need the first $50,000 by Friday to secure the resort. Liquid funds. No checks that are going to bounce." I stared at the folder. I let my hand tremble as I reached for my coffee cup. I made sure the porcelain rattled against the saucer. Clink, clink. It was the sound of age, the sound of weakness. I saw Brittany exchange a look with Justin, a look of pity mixed with impatience. They saw a frail old man losing his grip. They did not see the man who had negotiated union contracts while staring down mobsters in the 1980s. "I do not have $50,000 in my checking account, son," I said, my voice wavering. "That is a lot of money for a retiree." Justin leaned in. His eyes were cold, devoid of any empathy. "Then sell the house, Dad. You are sitting on equity, or cash out your 401k. You are 72. What are you saving it for anyway? You do not need that big empty house. It is depressing. Honestly, it is an eyesore in the neighborhood. Selling it would be doing everyone a favor." He called the home I built with his mother an eyesore. He called the place where he took his first steps depressing. I felt a flash of white-hot anger, but I swallowed it down. I pushed the anger into the pit of my stomach, where I stored all the fuel for what was coming. I sighed, rubbing my forehead, as if I were confused and overwhelmed. "I suppose I could," I mumbled. "I could talk to the bank. I could liquidate the retirement fund." "Catherine, his mother, would have wanted you to have this day." Brittany checked her watch. "Great," she said, snapping her gum, "so we can count on the transfer." I nodded slowly, but then I raised a finger. "There is one thing," I said. "One small thing." Brittany groaned. "What is it now, Bill?" "If I am going to cash out my retirement," I said, creating a fiction on the spot that sounded exactly like something a penny-pinching old man would say, "I need to worry about the tax implications. The IRS watches my pension like a hawk. If I just give you the money, it looks like a gift, and I get hit with a tax bill I cannot afford." I paused to take a sip of water, watching them buy the lie. So I continued, "I need to pay the vendors directly. I need my name on the contracts. That way I can write it off as event coordination expenses. My accountant says it is the only way to save my hide come April." Justin looked at Brittany. She shrugged, picking at a piece of lint on her designer jacket. "Who cares whose name is on the paper, Justin?" she said. "As long as the check clears and I get my flowers, I do not care if Mickey Mouse signs the contract. Just get it done." Justin turned back to me. "Fine, Dad. Whatever. You sign the contracts. You pay the bills directly. Just make sure the deposit is in by Friday. Do not embarrass me." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a pair of reading glasses. One of the arms was held together with duct tape. I put them on slowly, deliberately, emphasizing my clumsiness. I pulled the folder toward me. "I will take care of it," I said. "I will go to the resort tomorrow and sign everything personally." They smiled. It was the smile of predators who had just secured their meal. They thought they had bullied a senile old man into giving up his life savings. They were so blinded by greed, they missed the trap completely. By putting my name on the contracts, they were not just making me the payer. They were making me the client, legal owner of the event. The venue, the flowers, the catering, the music, every single element of their perfect day would belong to me. They were handing me the kill switch to their own wedding, and they were too busy counting my money to notice. I stood up, clutching the folder to my chest like a lifeline. "I will not let you down," I said. Good, Justin said, already looking back at his phone. Now, if you do not mind, we have real business to discuss. You can go. I walked out of the cafe, my boots heavy on the marble. As soon as I hit the fresh air of the street, the shake in my hands vanished. I took out my phone and called Leonard. It is done, I told him. I have control. Prepare the checks, Leonard, and tell the resort owner I am coming to see him. Tell him the chairman is coming out of retirement. The venue for the dinner was Le Chateau, a French restaurant downtown, where the waiters wore tuxedos better than the one I got married in, and the menu did not have prices for the ladies. I arrived 10 minutes early wearing my best suit. It was a charcoal gray number I bought off the rack at a department store 15 years ago. The fabric was a little shiny at the elbows, and the lapels were too wide for current fashion, but it was clean. To me, it represented dignity. To the people I was about to meet, it represented failure. I stood by the maitre d' station, clutching my hat, waiting for the arrival of the royalty my son had married into. When the Vanderbilts walked in, the air in the room seemed to change. It became heavier, perfumed with something floral and aggressive. Mrs. Vanderbilt walked first. She was a woman who was fighting a losing war against gravity, armed with Botox and diamonds. She wore a fur stole despite it being 60 degrees outside. Behind her waddled Mr. Vanderbilt, a man who looked like he had swallowed a bowling ball. He was loud. He was taking a call on his cell phone as he walked past the hostess, ignoring her completely. Justin and Brittany trailed behind them like eager puppies. When Justin saw me, he winced. I saw his eyes dart to my scuffed dress shoes. He quickly moved to block me from view, but Mrs. Vanderbilt had already spotted me. She stopped. She looked me up and down, with the clinical detachment of a health inspector finding a rat in the kitchen. "Oh," she said, her voice carrying across the silent dining room. "This must be the father." "Justin, you did not tell me he was quite so rustic." We sat down. They put me at the end of the table near the kitchen door. I could hear the chefs shouting and the clatter of pans every time the server walked through. I did not mind. It reminded me of honest work. For the first 40 minutes, I was invisible. The Vanderbilts did not speak to me. They spoke to the room. They performed. Mr. Vanderbilt ordered a bottle of wine that cost more than my first car without even looking at the sommelier. He leaned back in his chair, expanding his chest, and began to hold court. "We just got back from Lake Como," he announced loudly, ensuring the table next to us could hear. The villa was decent, but the staff was sluggish. You know how it is in Europe. No work ethic. Not like here in the States where we build empires. Mrs. Vanderbilt nodded, touching her necklace. "It is exhausting maintaining 3 properties," she sighed. "The upkeep on the Hamptons estate alone is a nightmare. We are thinking of selling the flat in Paris. It is just too small for our needs now." Finally, after they had exhausted their list of imaginary conquests, Mr. Vanderbilt turned his gaze toward me. His eyes were watery and bloodshot. "So, Bill," he said, not bothering with the title, "Justin tells me you drove trucks for a living." I set my water glass down. "I started a logistics company," I said quietly. "I began as a driver, yes. I hauled steel across the Midwest for 20 years. Mr. Vanderbilt let out a short, barking laugh. He looked at Brittany. "A truck driver. How quaint." "It is good, honest work, I suppose. Someone has to move the goods for people like us who actually buy them." He leaned forward, resting his heavy forearms on the white tablecloth. His suit sleeve rode up, and that was when I saw it. The watch. It was a gold Patek Philippe Nautilus. To the untrained eye, it was a symbol of ultimate status, a timepiece worth over $100,000. It gleamed under the crystal chandelier. I stared at it. I did not stare because I was impressed. I stared because I own 2 of them. I keep them in a climate-controlled vault in my real home. I know every curve, every screw, every tick of that specific movement. Mr. Vanderbilt noticed me looking. He shook his wrist, making the gold flash. "Like it, Bill?" he asked with a smirk. "It is a Patek." Swiss. Probably costs more than your house. I smiled a slow, dry smile. It is very shiny, I said. I did not tell him that the spacing on the bezel was off by a millimeter. I did not tell him that the hue of the gold was too yellow, indicating a lower purity alloy. I did not tell him that the second hand had a microscopic stutter that a genuine Patek movement would never have. It was a fake. A high-quality fake likely bought in a back alley in Hong Kong or ordered from a shady website, but a fake nonetheless. And just like that, the puzzle pieces clicked into place. The loud bragging, the obsession with status, the rudeness. People with real money do not need to scream about it. People with real money do not wear counterfeit watches to intimidate retirees. The Vanderbilts were not royalty. They were frauds. And they were sitting across from the only man in the room who could spot a counterfeit from 50 feet away. I took a sip of my water. The game had just become much more interesting. The check arrived on a small silver tray placed discreetly in the center of the table. It sat there like a landmine. The conversation, which had been a monologue of the Vanderbilts' imaginary conquests, suddenly died. Mr. Vanderbilt patted the breast pocket of his suit. He patted his sides. He frowned, putting on a performance that would not have made the cut in a high school play. "Oh dear," he said, his voice thick with false surprise. "It seems I left my wallet in the limousine. I must have dropped it when I was on that call with the ambassador." Mrs. Vanderbilt sighed dramatically. "And my clutch is buried in the car under all the shopping bags." "Justin, darling." "Do you have your card?" Justin froze. He looked at me. He knew exactly what was in his bank account, which was absolutely nothing until my wire transfer cleared on Friday. He began to sweat. Brittany rolled her eyes. She looked at me, her gaze traveling from my worn collar to the check. "Bill," she said, her voice dripping with condensation. "Since you insisted on coming tonight, and frankly, since your attire has been a bit of a distraction for the other diners, I think it is only fair that you handle this. Consider it an apology." An apology. She wanted me to pay for the privilege of being insulted. She wanted a fine for existing in her presence. I reached for the leather folder and flipped it open. $3,500. They had ordered the vintage champagne. They had ordered the truffle supplement. They had eaten like kings on a pauper's dime. I looked at Justin. He was studying the tablecloth, refusing to meet my eyes. He was letting his fiancée extort his father because he was too weak to stand up to a pair of con artists with fake watches. "Very well," I said. I closed the folder. I reached into the back pocket of my trousers and pulled out my wallet. It was an old bifold, the leather cracked and shaped to my hip. I opened it and pulled out the card. To the naked eye, it looked like garbage. It was covered in strips of gray duct tape. The magnetic strip was exposed, but the front was a mess of adhesive and scratches. I had deliberately distressed it years ago to stop people from asking questions at the hardware store. Underneath that tape, however, was solid titanium. It was an American Express Centurion card, the black card invite only with no spending limit. It could buy this restaurant. It could buy the block this restaurant sat on. Mr. Vanderbilt snorted when he saw it. "Good Lord, Bill," he chuckled. "Do they even accept whatever that is in a place like this that looks like a library card that went through the washing machine?" I ignored him. I placed the heavy taped-up card on the silver tray. It landed with a dull metallic thud that plastic does not make. "I will pay," I said, looking Mr. Vanderbilt dead in the watery eyes. "Consider it an entrance fee." "Entrance fee for what?" Brittany asked, raising an eyebrow. "To watch the show," I replied. They laughed. They thought I was talking about their life, their glamour, their high society world. They thought I was paying to be a spectator in their kingdom. They had no idea I was talking about the tragedy that was about to unfold, and they were the main characters. The waiter returned. He was a professional. He picked up the tray. He paused for a fraction of a second when he touched the card. He felt the weight. He felt the cold metal beneath the tape. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. His eyes widened slightly. He nodded a barely perceptible dip of his chin. He knew. Waiters at this level always know. He walked away. The Vanderbilts went back to talking about their summer plans in the Hamptons. They did not say thank you. They did not offer to split it. They took it as their due. When the waiter brought the receipt back, he handed it to me with two hands, a gesture of extreme respect. I signed it with a cheap ballpoint pen. I stood up. "I will see you all at the wedding," I said. Mr. Vanderbilt waved a hand dismissively. Yes. Try to wear something less offensive next time, Bill." I walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air. I had just spent $3,000 on dinner I barely touched. But as I walked to the corner to hail a cab, I did not feel cheated. I felt like I had just bought the best seats in the house for a public execution. And the first head to roll would be Mr. Vanderbilt's. I traded the scent of expensive perfume for the smell of stale beer and sawdust. The Broken Spoke was a dive bar on the south side, the kind of place where the neon sign flickered like a dying heartbeat, and the patrons drank to forget, not to celebrate. It was perfect. I walked to the back booth where the shadows were deep and the music was low. Mike was already there, nursing a bourbon neat. Mike was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and left out in the rain. 20 years in special operations had left him with a stillness that made lesser men nervous. To me, he was the only person I trusted to find dirt in a desert. He did not smile when I sat down. He just tapped a thick manila envelope that sat on the sticky table between us. "You are not going to like this, Bill," Mike said, his voice a low rumble. "Or maybe you will. Depends on how much you hate them." I signaled the bartender for a beer. "Try me," I said. Mike flipped the folder open. Photos spilled out. They were not glamour shots from Lake Como. They were surveillance photos taken in Florida. One showed a rundown bungalow with a foreclosure notice taped to the front door. Another showed Mr. Vanderbilt, or whatever his real name was, arguing with a tow truck driver who was hooking up a leased Mercedes. "Meet the Millers from Tampa," Mike said, pointing to a mugshot that looked suspiciously like the distinguished gentleman I had just bought dinner for. Or, as they are currently known, the Vanderbilts. They are not old money, Bill. They are no money. I picked up the foreclosure notice. It was dated 3 months ago. The bank had seized their primary residence. They had over $500,000 in credit card debt distributed across 40 different cards. They were drowning. "They are grifters," Mike continued. "They bounce from city to city running the same play. They find a target, usually a family with a good reputation, but maybe not enough street smarts, and they attach themselves like leeches. They think Justin is their golden ticket." I looked at the photo of Mrs. Vanderbilt smoking a cigarette on a plastic lawn chair, looking far less regal than she had an hour ago. "They think Justin is rich?" I asked. Mike nodded. "They did their homework, but they got it wrong. They think Justin is the CEO. They think he is the one sitting on the millions. They have no idea he is broke and living off your secret transfers. They are selling their daughter Brittany to him because they think he can pay off their debts." I laughed. It was a dark, dry sound. It was the funniest thing I had heard in years. My son, the man who was ashamed of my poverty, was being hunted by predators who thought he was a prince. It was a comedy of errors, a double blind con. The broke posing as the elite trying to rob the broke posing as the elite. And I was the only one with actual money watching them circle each other. "So Brittany knows?" I asked. "She is the bait," Mike said. "She is in on it. She needs a husband who can fund her lifestyle and keep her parents out of jail for fraud." I put the photos back in the envelope. The Vanderbilts were not royalty. They were desperate rats fleeing a sinking ship, and they had just boarded my son's dinghy, thinking it was a yacht. I took a long drink of my beer. It tasted cold and clean. "Let them dream for a few more days, Mike," I said. "I want them to feel like they have won. I want them to walk into that wedding thinking they have secured the bag." Mike smirked. "You are a cold son of a gun, Bill." I stood up, tossing a 20 on the table. "I am just a businessman protecting his investment, Mike. And right now my investment is about to teach everyone a very expensive lesson." But Mike was not finished. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. He placed it on the sticky table between us, next to his bourbon. "You need to hear this, Bill," he said. "This is from a dinner Justin had with Brittany 2 weeks ago at a steakhouse. I have a contact on the waitstaff." I watched the little red light blink as Mike hit play. My son's voice cut through the noise of the bar. It was confident, arrogant, the voice of a man who thought he ruled the world. "Do not worry about the old man, babe," Justin was saying on the recording. "He is sitting on a fortune from the logistics sale, but his mind is going. He forgets what day it is half the time. I have power of attorney. I control the trust. Once we are married and he gets settled into a facility, all that capital flows to us." I sat there frozen. The beer in my hand suddenly felt warm. My son had not just lied about his own success. He had painted me as a senile invalid. He had turned me into a walking checkbook with dementia. He told the woman he loved that I was losing my mind just so he could pretend he held the keys to my kingdom. He did not have power of attorney. He did not control a dime. But Brittany did not know that. Mike stopped the recording. It was a lie built on a lie wrapped in a fantasy. Justin was broke pretending to be the guardian of a family fortune. The Vanderbilts were broke pretending to be aristocrats. Brittany was the prize they were all fighting over, and she was just as complicit as the rest of them. "It is a house of cards," Bill Mike said, swirling his drink. "Everyone is bluffing. Everyone is waiting for someone else to pick up the tab. And guess who that someone is?" "Me," I whispered. It was the perfect storm of greed. My son was trying to con a family of con artists. They thought he was their savior. He thought they were his ticket to high society. And I was the goose they were all waiting to kill for the golden egg. I felt a strange sense of clarity. For months I had wondered where I went wrong. I wondered if I had been too hard on him, too distant. But this was not about my parenting. This was about character. My son was willing to erase my dignity to fund his delusions. I stood up. My knees popped, but I felt stronger than I had in years. I thanked Mike and told him to keep digging. I wanted to know everything. I wanted to know what color socks Mr. Vanderbilt wore and how much Justin owed on his credit cards. I walked out into the Chicago night. The wind was biting, but I did not zip up my jacket. I needed the cold. I needed to stay sharp. They were all playing a game of poker with my money, but they forgot one thing. I was the one who built the casino. And the house always wins. I walked into the Office of Weddings by Claudia, located in the trendy arts district. It was a space designed to intimidate. Everything was white. White leather sofas, white orchids, white marble floors. It felt less like a place of celebration and more like a surgical theater where bank accounts went to die. Claudia, the wedding planner, was a woman who looked like she had been sharpened to a point. She wore a severe black suit and glasses with frames so thick they looked like safety goggles. When I entered, Justin and Brittany were already there, sipping sparkling water with lime. Claudia did not stand up to greet me. She just gestured vaguely to a low chair in the corner, as if I were a delivery driver waiting for a signature. So she began without preamble. "We have elevated the vision." Brittany and I felt the initial concept was a little pedestrian. "We need to make a statement." She tapped a screen on the wall and a digital presentation began. The numbers started flashing and I felt my eyebrows rising. The original budget of $180,000, which was already my entire life savings, had vanished. In its place was a new number, $250,000. I leaned forward, squinting at the breakdown. I saw a line item for $25,000 labeled Vintage Champagne Architecture. "Excuse me," I said, my voice raspy. "What is champagne architecture?" Claudia sighed, rolling her eyes at Brittany. "It is a tower, Bill, an antique crystal champagne tower flown in from a chateau in France. It requires a structural engineer to assemble. It is the centerpiece of the reception. It is non-negotiable." I looked further down the list. Guest favors Apple iPads. $50,000. iPads, I asked, looking at Justin. "You are giving tablets to people as party favors. Son, these people are just coming for a free meal. Do they really need $500 electronics too?" That was the wrong thing to say. Justin slammed his glass down on the coaster. The sound cracked through the pristine white room. "Dad." "Stop it," he hissed. "You are embarrassing me. You are acting like a penny pincher. This is not a backyard barbecue. These are the Vanderbilts. These are influencers. We cannot give them sugared almonds. We need to show them we are on their level. If you cannot handle the cost, just say so, and I will find someone else who appreciates my vision." He was bluffing. I knew he was bluffing. He had no one else. He had no money. He was trying to bully me into silence because he was terrified I would say no. Brittany chimed in, picking at her cuticles. "Honestly, Bill, if you are going to nickel and dime every little thing, maybe you should just sign the check and wait outside. Your energy is very negative." I looked at the bill. $250,000. It was $250,000 for a party that was really just a stage for their vanity. I looked at the woman who wanted iPads for strangers, and the son who yelled at his father for asking a reasonable question. "I am sorry," I said, lowering my head in mock submission. I worry about the future. I want you kids to be secure. Security is for boring people," Justin scoffed. "We are building a legacy. Just sign the papers, Dad." Claudia pushed the contract across the desk. It was thick. It smelled of expensive paper. "Sign here," she said, pointing with a manicured nail. "And here. And initial here to acknowledge the non-refundable deposit clause." I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake this time. I was not signing a wedding contract. I was signing a death warrant for their social standing. "I will sign," I said softly, "but I need to read the fine print." "You know old habits." Justin groaned, throwing his head back. "Oh my God, Dad, just sign it." I ignored him. I needed to make sure my special clause was in there. The one Leonard had drafted. The one that gave me the power to pull the plug. And there it was, buried on page 14 in font size 8. The payer reserves the right to unilateral cancellation of services. I smiled internally. I signed my name, William Harrington, with a flourish. "There," I said, pushing the contract back. "It is done. You will have your tower. You will have your iPads." Claudia snatched the paper away, as if she were afraid I would change my mind. "Excellent," she said. "The first installment is due now." I stood up. I walked to the door. Justin did not say thank you. He was already talking to Claudia about the lighting for the cake-cutting ceremony. I walked out into the street, feeling the hum of the city. $250,000. It was an expensive lesson, but as I hailed a cab, I decided it was worth every penny. I was not just paying for a wedding. I was buying the rights to the greatest show on earth. I reached into the inside pocket of my worn canvas jacket and pulled out my checkbook. It was a standard-issue blue vinyl folder, the kind you get for free when you open a checking account, with $50. I laid it flat on Claudia's pristine glass desk. The silence in the room was heavy, filled only with the sound of my pen scratching against the paper. I wrote out the date slowly. I wrote out the name of the agency. Then I wrote the number. $50,000. It was the deposit. the first blood in the water. My hand shook a little as I signed the bottom line. It was not a feign this time. It was a physical reaction to the sheer waste of it all. $50,000 could have funded a scholarship. It could have repaired the roof of the Veterans Hall down the street. Instead, it was going toward a champagne tower and iPad party favors for people who would not even remember my name. I tore the check from the book. The ripping sound was loud in the quiet office. Claudia's hand twitched. She wanted to grab it. She was practically salivating. "Wait," I said, holding the check just out of her reach. I pulled a single sheet of paper from my back pocket. It was folded in thirds and looked like it had been sitting there for a week. It was a document Leonard, my attorney, had drafted that morning. "My accountant insists on this," I said, my voice sounding apologetic and frail. "He says that because I am liquidating my retirement assets, I need to attach this addendum to any large expenditure. It is just a formality. Tax codes, you know. They are a nightmare for seniors." Justin sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of frustration. "Oh my God, Dad. Are you serious? Another piece of paper? We have been here for an hour. Just give her the check." "It is required, son," I said, keeping my eyes downcast. "If I do not attach this, the IRS could freeze my pension. I just need you and Brittany to initial here and here, and Claudia needs to sign the bottom." I slid the paper across the desk. It looked boring. It looked like standard bureaucratic nonsense. Buried in the middle of the dense legal jargon was a single sentence written in plain English if anyone bothered to read it. Clause 4A stated that the financier, William Harrington, retained the absolute and unilateral right to cancel all services, revoke all payments, and void the contract at any moment for any reason without liability. It was the kill switch. It was the button that would detonate their world. Claudia glanced at it. She saw the words tax compliance and lost interest. She scribbled her signature at the bottom, her eyes still glued to the check in my hand. She did not care about my rights. She only cared about her commission. Brittany did not even look at the paper. She was too busy pulling her phone out of her purse. She nudged Justin. "Babe, look," she said, pointing the camera at themselves. "We need a boomerang for the story." Holding the deposit check. It's a milestone moment. Justin grabbed the pen from my hand. He did not read a single word. He did not even glance at the title of the document. He just scribbled his initials next to the X I had marked. Then he shoved the paper toward Brittany. She signed it while looking at her reflection in her phone screen, checking her lipstick. "There," Justin said, shoving the paper back at me. "Are you happy now? Can we please get out of here?" I handed the check to Claudia. She snatched it as if it were a winning lottery ticket. Justin and Brittany stood up immediately. They did not look at me. They huddled together, holding the contract I had just signed, the one without the addendum, and posed. Brittany held the contract up like a trophy. Justin put his arm around her waist. "Smile, babe," she chirped. "Caption it. Big things happening." Secured the bag. The flash went off. They took photo after photo, preening and pouting for an audience of strangers on the internet. They were celebrating their victory. They were documenting the moment they secured the funding for their dream wedding. I folded my copy of the addendum, the real contract, and placed it carefully back into my pocket. I patted it once. It felt warm against my chest. They were too busy editing filters to notice that I was the only one in the room who wasn't smiling. They thought they had secured the bag. They had no idea they had just signed a confession of stupidity, and I held the only copy that mattered. I stood up and walked toward the door. "Make sure you get the lighting right," I said softly as I passed them. "You will want to remember exactly how this looked before the lights go out." They didn't hear me. They were too busy posting their success to the world. I was sitting at my kitchen table staring at the peeling paint on the wall when the landline rang. It was the old beige phone mounted on the wall, the one I had kept since 1995. I let it ring twice before picking it up. It was Nancy, the branch manager at the local community credit union. Nancy knew me as Bill, the retiree who came in every Friday to deposit a small check and take a lollipop for the neighbor's kid. She did not know me as William Harrington, the tycoon. Her voice was tight with worry. "Bill," she said, "I am so sorry to bother you at home, but a check just cleared through the automated system and something about it did not sit right with me. It is for $20,000. It drained your emergency savings account down to double digits. I just wanted to verify you wrote it." I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. $20,000. That was the account I kept for house repairs for a new roof or a broken furnace. It was the money the world thought was my entire safety net. "Who was it made out to, Nancy?" I asked, my grip tightening on the receiver. "It was made out to cash, Bill," she said. "But the endorsement on the back, well, it was signed by you, but the handwriting looks a little shaky. And the person who cashed it at the downtown branch, well, the teller noted it was a young man. He had your ID info." I closed my eyes. I knew exactly who it was. I did not need to see the security footage. I did not need to see the signature. I knew the jagged loop of the letter W. I knew the way the pen pressed too hard on the paper. "It is okay, Nancy." I lied, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. "I wrote it. I am helping my son with a down payment. My arthritis is just acting up today. That is why the signature looks bad." Nancy let out a breath of relief. "Oh, thank goodness, Bill. You scared me. You are a good father. That is a generous gift." I hung up the phone. I sat there in the silence of the house that my son wanted me to sell. A generous gift. It wasn't a gift. It was a theft. It was a felony. Justin had come over 2 days ago, pretending to look for a box of old photos in the study. He must have swiped the checkbook from the desk drawer while I was making him tea. He had stolen from me. He had stolen from the father he believed was living on a fixed income. He thought he was taking the last of my savings, leaving me with nothing but a few dollars for groceries. And he did it without hesitation. I walked into the living room and looked at the fireplace mantel. There was a photo of Justin at 7 years old. He had found a wallet in the park with $50 in it. A fortune for a kid. I remembered kneeling down to his eye level, holding his small shoulders. I remembered telling him that a man is only as good as his word, and that taking what isn't yours breaks something inside you that you can never fix. We returned the wallet together. I bought him ice cream. I told him I was proud of him. I looked at that smiling boy in the photo, and I realized he was dead. The boy who returned the wallet was gone. In his place was a 32-year-old stranger who would rob his own father blind to impress a woman who hated him. A deep physical pain radiated from my chest. It wasn't a heart attack. It was heartbreak. It was the visceral realization that my son did not just disrespect me, he viewed me as prey. He was a predator feeding on the weak. If I had actually been the poor old man he thought I was, this theft would have put me on the street. He did not care. I took the photo off the mantel. I looked at it one last time, remembering the smell of his hair when he was little and the way he used to hold my hand crossing the street. Then I placed the photo face down on the table. The tears did not come. Instead, a steel door slammed shut inside my soul. The conflict between the loving father and the ruthless businessman ended right there. The father had tried to save him. The father had made excuses, but the father had just been robbed. I picked up my phone and dialed Leonard. "I am not reporting it," I said before he could even say hello. "Bill, you have to report it," Leonard said, his voice sharp. "That is grand larceny. He forged your signature." "No," I said, my voice flat and dead. "I am not calling the police. Not yet. If I arrest him now, he learns about the law. He learns about bail. He learns about lawyers. That is too impersonal." "Then what are you going to do, Bill?" I am going to let him keep it, I said. I am going to let him spend every dime of that stolen money. I want him to buy the champagne. I want him to buy the suits. I want him to feel rich. Because when I take it all back, Leonard, when I pull the rug out from under him, I want him to remember this moment. I want him to remember that he stole his father's safety net and thought he got away with it. This was the drop that caused the cup to overflow. There was no going back now. There was no mercy left in me. I wasn't just going to ruin his wedding. I was going to dismantle his life brick by brick, and I was going to use the very money he stole to build his prison. I sat in my study, the leather chair creaking under my weight. The phone was still warm in my hand from the call with the bank manager, but I was already dialing again. My fingers moved with the precision of a man defusing a bomb. I was not calling the police station. I was not calling a bail bondsman. I was calling Leonard back. When he answered, his voice was wary. He expected me to be raging. He expected me to be shouting for justice. Instead, my voice was quieter than a whisper in a library. Leonard, I said, trigger the contingency. There was a long pause on the other end. Are you sure, Bill? Leonard asked. Once we execute the Catherine Protocol, there is no going back. That money leaves your personal accounts. It goes into the trust. It becomes irrevocable. You cannot change your mind if he apologizes. You cannot undo this if he gives you a grandkid. It is a one-way street. I looked at the empty space on the mantel where Justin's photo used to sit. I looked at the dust outline that remained. It looked like a ghost. I am sure, I said. I move it all. The portfolio, the real estate holdings, the liquid cash from the sale of the logistics company, every single cent of the $52 million. Put it all in the Catherine Harrington Foundation. I heard the sound of typing on the other end. Leonard was a machine. He did not argue with a made-up mind. And Leonard, I added, my voice hardening, I want a specific clause added to the bylaws of the foundation. I want it written in stone. No descendant of William Harrington shall serve on the board, draw a salary, or receive a grant. Not now. Not ever. Understood, Leonard said. I am filing the paperwork with the state now. By 5 o'clock today, you will technically be a man of very modest means, living in a house owned by a charitable trust. Justin will be the sole heir to a bank account with zero balance. I hung up the phone. I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. It was raining, a gray, miserable drizzle that slicked the asphalt. I imagined $52 million. It was a number so big it was abstract to most people. It was freedom. It was power. It was a legacy. For years I had held on to it, imagining the day I would sit Justin down and tell him the truth. I had played the movie in my head 1,000 times. I would show him the accounts. I would see his eyes light up, not with greed, but with relief. I would hand him the keys to the kingdom and say, "Son, I built this mountain for you. Climb it." That movie was over. The projector had burned out. Justin wanted money. He wanted to steal $20,000 from his old man's rainy day fund. Fine. He could have the crumbs, but the loaf was gone. I felt a strange, dark satisfaction settle in my gut. It was the feeling of slamming a vault door shut and spinning the dial. He thought he was clever. He thought he was taking what he was owed. He had no idea that by stealing a bucket of water, he had just drained the ocean dry. "You want my money, son?" I thought, staring at the rain hitting the glass. "I will let you see it. I will let you stand at the foot of the mountain and look up at the peak. But you will never, ever climb it. You will never touch a single greenback. You will spend the rest of your life knowing that you traded an empire for a weekend in the Maldives and a few cheap suits." I walked back to my desk. I opened the drawer and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. I began to write a list. It was not a list of assets. It was a list of debts. Justin's debts. The Vanderbilt's debts. The money was safe. Catherine's name was on it now, protecting it from the grave. Now I could focus on the wedding. I had paid the deposit. I had signed the contracts. I had let them steal my savings. I had given them enough rope to hang themselves 10 times over. Now it was time to kick the chair. I walked into the Vera Wang boutique on Michigan Avenue 3 days later. It was a sanctuary of hushed voices and soft lighting, the kind of place where the air conditioning smelled like vanilla and money. I was not wearing a tuxedo. I was wearing my usual uniform, a pair of dark blue coveralls with a name patch that said Bill on the chest, and my heavy work boots. I had just come from inspecting a hydraulic lift at a friend's garage, and I smelled faintly of industrial solvent. To the security guard at the door, I looked like I was there to fix a clogged toilet. He stepped forward to stop me, his hand raised, but I breezed past him with the confidence of a man who could buy the building. "I am here to pay a bill," I muttered, which was technically true. I found Brittany in the main salon. She was standing on a circular velvet pedestal surrounded by 3 mirrors that reflected her vanity from every angle. She was wearing a dress that cost $15,000. It was a cloud of silk organza and chantilly lace, a masterpiece of design that was completely wasted on the woman wearing it. She looked beautiful on the outside, like a perfectly frosted cake that was rotten in the middle. She was not smiling. She was screaming. Her face was twisted in a snarl as she pointed a manicured finger at a young shop assistant who was kneeling on the floor, trying to adjust the hem. "You call this a pin?" she shrieked. "You pricked me. Do you have any idea how much my skin is worth? If I bleed on this dress, I am suing you personally. You are incompetent. Get me someone who knows what they are doing." The girl was trembling, tears welling in her eyes. It was a scene of pure, unadulterated entitlement. Brittany was not just a bridezilla. She was a bully. I cleared my throat. The sound was loud in the quiet room. Brittany spun around on the pedestal, the layers of silk swishing around her. When she saw me, her jaw dropped. The anger on her face shifted instantly to disgust. It was as if I had just dumped a bucket of sludge onto the pristine white carpet. "Oh my God," she gasped, clutching her chest. "What are you doing here? How did you even get in?" I took a step forward, my boots squeaking on the floor. "I just wanted to see the dress, Brittany," I said, making my voice sound small and eager. "Justin told me you were here. I wanted to see what my money is buying." Her eyes narrowed. She looked at my coveralls. She looked at my boots. Then she looked around the shop to see if anyone important was watching. Her mother, Mrs. Vanderbilt, was sitting on a plush sofa nearby, sipping champagne. She looked at me over the rim of her glass with pure disdain. "You cannot be in here," Brittany hissed, stepping down from the pedestal. "Look at you. You are filthy. You smell like a mechanic shop. You are dirtying the air, Voss, just by breathing in it. This is a high-end boutique, Bill. This is Vera Wang. They do not let people like you in here unless they are taking out the trash." I stood my ground, clutching my old baseball cap in my hands. "I just wanted to be involved," I said. "It is a lot of money, Brittany. $15,000. She marched up to me, getting close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume masking the scent of her cruelty. "You paid the money because you had to," she whispered venomously. "That does not buy you a ticket to my fitting. You are ruining the aesthetic. You are embarrassing me. If anyone takes a photo and you are in the background looking like a janitor, I will kill you." She pointed a long, sharp finger toward the glass doors. "Get out," she ordered. "Right now." I looked at her. I looked at Mrs. Vanderbilt, who was smirking. I looked at the shop assistant, who was watching with wide, sympathetic eyes. "I will wait in the lobby," I offered. "No," Brittany snapped. "You will not wait in the lobby. You will go outside. In fact, since you are here and you look like the help, you can be useful. My car is parked out front. It is the white Range Rover. The meter is expired and I do not trust the valet. Go stand by it. Watch it. Make sure nobody touches it. That is about the only thing you are qualified to do. Watch the car." She wanted the man who paid for the dress to stand on the sidewalk like a guard dog while she played princess. I looked at her one last time. I memorized the sneer on her lips. "Okay, Brittany," I said softly. "I will watch the car." I turned and walked out. I did not look back. As the heavy glass door closed behind me, I heard her say to her mother, "Can you believe the audacity? I need more champagne." I walked out onto the busy street. It had started to rain, a cold, gray drizzle that soaked into my coveralls. I found the Range Rover. I stood next to it, water dripping from the brim of my cap, watching the shoppers hurry by. People looked at me with pity. They saw a sad old man waiting in the rain. They were wrong. They were looking at a man who had just decided to burn the whole world down. The rain in Chicago has a way of finding the gaps in your armor. It was a cold, driving sleet that soaked through the shoulders of my canvas coveralls within minutes. I stood next to the white Range Rover, my boots heavy on the wet pavement, water dripping from the brim of my baseball cap, like a metronome counting down the seconds of my patience. Passers-by gave me a wide berth. To them, I was just invisible labor, a sad old man earning a few dollars by guarding a luxury car he could never afford to touch, let alone drive. I turned my back to the wind and looked through the plate glass window of the boutique. It was warm inside. The lighting was golden. I could see Brittany standing near the register, surrounded by her entourage. Her mother, Mrs. Vanderbilt, was laughing, her head thrown back, holding a fresh glass of champagne. Then Brittany pointed. She extended a manicured finger toward the window right at me. She said something, and the whole group turned to look. They saw me shivering in the rain. They saw the father of the groom standing guard like a doll. They did not look away in shame. They laughed. They covered their mouths and giggled. Mrs. Vanderbilt made a shooing motion with her hand, mocking my position. They were not just indifferent to my suffering. They were entertained by it. To them, my humiliation was a feature of their day, a little bonus amusement to go with the $15,000 dress. I stared at them, and for the first time in 40 years, I felt absolutely nothing. The last shred of guilt I had about ruining my son's wedding evaporated like steam on the cold glass. The father who wanted to protect his boy was gone. The man standing in the rain was William Harrington, the man who had crushed union strikes and hostile takeovers without blinking. They thought they were looking at a servant. They had no idea they were looking at their executioner. I reached into my wet pocket and pulled out my phone. The screen was slick with rain. I dialed Mike. He picked up on the first ring, professional and alert. "Mike," I said, my voice steady despite the cold. "I want you to execute the purchase." "Which one, Bill?" Mike asked. "The Vanderbilts," I said, watching Mrs. Vanderbilt accept a refill of her drink. "You said their debt was bundled and up for sale by the collection agency in Florida. You said their mortgage was in default and being sold on the secondary market." "That is right," Mike confirmed. "It is junk debt, Bill. Pennies on the dollar. Nobody wants it because they have no assets to seize. It is a bad investment." "It is not an investment, Mike," I told him. My eyes locked on the women laughing in the window. "It is leverage. I want you to buy it all. Every credit card balance. The mortgage on their foreclosed house. The liens on their leased cars. I want to own every single dime they owe to every single creditor." There was a pause on the line. "You want to be their sole creditor. You want to be the one holding the leash." "I want to be the bank, Mike," I said. "I want to be the reason they wake up sweating in the middle of the night. Buy it. Pay whatever premium you have to pay to get the paperwork done by Friday. When they walk into that wedding, I want to legally own the shirts on their backs." "Consider it done," Mike said. "And Bill, get out of the rain. You are going to catch pneumonia." I hung up the phone. I looked at the Range Rover beside me. It was a beautiful machine. I ran my hand along the hood. Then very deliberately, I leaned against it. I took a handful of greasy washers from my pocket, leftovers from the garage, and started tossing them gently in my hand, letting the oil and grime drip onto the pristine white paint. I stayed there for another 10 minutes just to make sure they saw me. When Brittany finally looked out again, her smile vanished. She saw me staring back at her, unblinking, unmoving, a dark stain on her perfect white world. She looked annoyed. She tapped on the glass, gesturing for me to move. I smiled. It was the smile of a wolf watching a lamb play in the meadow. I tipped my wet cap to her, turned around, and walked away into the gray city, leaving her car unguarded, and her future sold to the highest bidder. 2 days before the wedding, I was sitting in my study looking at the rain streak against the window pane. The house was quiet, a stillness that felt heavy like the air before a tornado touches down. The phone rang at 11 o'clock at night. It was late. Too late for good news. I knew who it was before I even looked at the caller ID. I picked up the receiver. "Hello, Justin." There was no greeting, no apology for the hour, just the frantic, breathless voice of a man who was drowning in his own ambition. "We have a problem, Dad," Justin said. "A big problem. The resort just hit us with a surcharge. Security fees over time for the staff, expedited shipping for the truffle bar. It is a mess. I need more money." I tightened my grip on the phone. I had already given him $250,000. I had liquidated the phantom retirement fund. I had emptied the emergency savings he stole from. "How much, son?" I asked, keeping my voice level. $50,000, he said, "and I need it by tomorrow morning. Or they pull the plug on the reception dinner." $50,000. It was an obscene amount for last-minute fees. It was a lie, of course. There were no surcharges. The contracts I signed, the real ones, locked in the prices. He needed cash. He probably had a gambling debt called in, or Brittany had seen a diamond necklace she couldn't live without. "Justin," I said, injecting a tremor into my voice, "I do not have $50,000 lying around. I gave you everything. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. The accounts are dry. I cannot just conjure money out of thin air." There was a silence on the line. It lasted for 10 seconds, but it felt like 10 years. Then Justin spoke. His voice was different. It wasn't frantic anymore. It was cold. It was the voice of a stranger. "Then find it, Dad. Go to a loan shark. Sell your truck. I do not care how you get it. But if that money is not in my account by 9 a.m., you do not have to worry about missing the wedding." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean," Justin said, his words slow and deliberate, "if you do not pay, I am going to solve the problem of your absence myself. I will tell everyone you died." I stopped breathing. The clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. "I will tell them you had a heart attack last night," Justin continued. "It is actually better that way. It is cleaner. A tragic death adds a layer of sympathy to the event. People will feel sorry for me. It is much better than explaining that my father is a broke loser who couldn't afford a suit. So you have a choice. Pay the $50,000, and you get to be the living, absent father. Do not pay, and you are the dead father. Either way, I win. But if you want to keep breathing in the eyes of my world, you will pay." He was threatening to erase me. He was willing to kill me off metaphorically to save face. To him, my death was a useful plot point, a narrative device to garner sympathy and explain away my empty seat. It was the ultimate devaluation of a human life. He did not just see me as an ATM. He saw me as a prop. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It was hot and angry. "You would do that," I whispered. "You would tell your wife, your in-laws, your friends that I am dead." "I will do whatever it takes to protect this day," Justin said. "Do we have a deal?" I looked at the photo of Catherine on my desk. I looked at the empty house. I realized then that the son I loved had died a long time ago. The man on the phone was just a ghost haunting his memory. "Okay, Justin," I said. "I will find the money. I will make a few calls. You will have it by morning." "Good," he said. "Thanks, Dad. Be thankful I am letting you contribute. It is the least you can do." He hung up. I sat there in the dark. Be thankful. He wanted me to be thankful for the privilege of being extorted. He wanted me to be grateful that he wasn't declaring me dead. I wiped the tear from my face. I stood up. I walked to the safe in the corner of the room and dialed the combination. Inside was a satellite phone and a ledger. I picked up the phone and dialed Mike. "I am sending the 50,000, I told him. "Bill, are you crazy?" Mike asked. "You are bleeding out." "No," I said. "I am baiting the hook. I am sending him the money. But Mike, I want you to trace where it goes. I know it is not for the resort. I will track it," Mike said. "And one more thing, Mike." "Yeah, Bill, prepare the jet. I am coming to Aspen. If my son wants to tell people I am dead, I think I should be there to witness my own resurrection." I sat in the dim light of my study staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. The banking portal was open. The cursor blinked in the amount field. $50,000. It was the ransom for my own existence. If I did not pay it, my son would declare me dead to the world. He would bury me before I had even taken my last breath, just to save face in front of people who did not matter. I typed in the numbers. 5, 0, 0, 0, 0. I clicked confirm. The screen flashed green. Transfer successful. The money was gone, speeding through the digital ether into Justin's account. He would wake up in the morning and see the balance. He would smile. He would think he had won. He would think he had squeezed the last drop of blood from the stone. I picked up my phone and typed a text message. It was painful to write, but necessary for the illusion. Money sent. Please do not kill me off. Enjoy the day. I hit send. Then I put the phone down and picked up the satellite phone I kept in the wall safe. This was the line I used for business that did not exist on paper. I dialed Mike. "Did the wire clear?" I asked, my voice stripping away the tremor of the heartbroken father and replacing it with the steel of the CEO. "It cleared," Mike said. "And Bill, we secured the package." The lender was more than happy to sell. He was getting worried Justin was a flight risk. He sold the note for 60 cents on the dollar. "Good," I said. "Send me the file." A moment later, my printer whirred to life. It spat out a single sheet of paper. It was a promissory note. A high-interest loan agreement from a shadow lender in Chicago. The kind of loan you take out when banks laugh in your face and credit card companies cut your cards. The principal was $50,000. With interest and penalties, it was closer to 80. The collateral was listed as future inheritance. I stared at the paper. My son had bet against my life. He had borrowed money from criminals, promising to pay them back with the money he expected to get when I died. He had literally leveraged my death to fund his lifestyle. I placed the document on my desk next to the thick file containing the Vanderbilt mortgages and credit card debt. I looked at the two piles. On the left, the parents of the bride, destitute frauds living on borrowed time. On the right, the groom, a gambler and a thief, betting on his father's grave. And in the middle, sitting in a leather chair in a house they wanted to sell, was the bank. I was no longer just a father. I was no longer just a guest they didn't want. I was their creditor. I owned the roof over the Vanderbilts' heads. I owned the car Justin drove. I owned the gambling debts that kept him awake at night. I owned every single aspect of their financial lives. They thought they were walking into a wedding. They were walking into a foreclosure. I picked up a red pen. I wrote "paid in full" across the top of the promissory note, not because the debt was gone, but because the debt now belonged to me. I was the collection agency, and I was not interested in payment plans. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the photo of Catherine. They wanted a contribution, I whispered to the empty room. Well, they got one. I just bought their lives. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped. The sky was clearing. I had paid the ransom. I had bought the debt. I had secured the trap. There was only one thing left to do. I went to my closet and pushed aside the flannel shirts and the denim coveralls. In the back, protected by a garment bag, was a tuxedo. It was custom-made in Italy from midnight blue wool. I ran my hand over the fabric. It was time to suit up. My son wanted to tell the world I was dead. I thought it was only fair that I showed up to the funeral to read the will. The Silver Peaks Resort in Aspen sits at an elevation of nearly 8,000 feet. The air up there is thin cold and smells like pine needles and old money. It is a fortress of timber and stone designed to make billionaires feel rugged while they sip cognac by a gas fire. My money had rented the Grand Ballroom, a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ski slopes. It was magnificent. It was expensive. And it was completely soulless. I watched the scene unfold from the security monitors in the manager's office just down the hall. The room was packed with 200 guests. As the camera panned across the crowd, I realized the depth of my son's emptiness. I did not recognize a single person. There were no cousins from Chicago. There were no old neighbors from the block where Justin learned to ride a bike. There were no friends from his childhood. Instead, the room was filled with strangers. There were minor celebrities Brittany had lured with the promise of free iPads. There were social climbers Justin was trying to impress. There were models hired to stand around and look beautiful to flesh out the crowd. It was not a wedding. It was a casting call. They were extras in a movie about a life my son desperately wanted to be real. Justin and Brittany stood at the head table. They looked perfect. Brittany wore the custom Vera Wang dress I had been thrown out of the store for visiting. She looked like an ice queen, pristine and sharp. Justin wore a tuxedo that fit him like a glove. He looked handsome. He looked rich. But mostly, he looked relieved. I zoomed in on the monitor. I saw the way his shoulders relaxed. I saw the easy smile on his face. He was scanning the room, checking the exits, not because he was afraid, but because he was double-checking his victory. He was making sure the seat reserved for the father of the groom was empty. He leaned over to Brittany and whispered something. She laughed, a cruel tinkling sound that the microphone picked up clearly. "He actually listened," she said. "I thought for sure he would show up in those awful work boots and ruin the photos." "He knows his place now," Justin replied, taking a sip of his drink. "He knows he does not belong here." They were celebrating my absence. To them, my empty chair was the best wedding gift I could have given. They thought I was sitting at home in my rusty kitchen mourning the loss of my son. They had no idea I was 50 feet away adjusting my silk tie. Justin tapped a silver fork against his crystal champagne flute. The sharp, ringing sound cut through the murmur of the crowd. The room went silent. The hired guests turned their faces toward him, eager to perform their role as an adoring audience. Justin raised his glass. The light caught the golden liquid, the vintage champagne I had paid for. He looked out at the room. He looked confident. He looked like a man who had successfully erased his history. "I would like to propose a toast," Justin announced, his voice projecting clearly. "To my beautiful bride, Brittany. To this incredible life we are building together. And most of all, to evolution." He paused, letting the drama build. "To leaving behind the things that drag us down," he continued. "To shedding the dead weight. Congratulations to us for finally escaping the heavy burdens of the past. We made it, babe. We are finally free." The crowd cheered. Brittany kissed him. They clinked glasses, drinking to their liberation. Burdens. That was what he called me. That was the summary of 40 years of fatherhood. I was dead weight. I was a stain to be scrubbed out. I stood up in the security office. I smoothed the lapels of my midnight blue tuxedo. It was an Italian cut, far superior to the rental Justin was wearing. He wanted to escape the past. He wanted to be free. I walked to the door. I was about to show him that the past does not just disappear because you spent someone else's money to hide it. The past was walking down the hallway, and it was bringing the bill. The applause for my son's speech faded into a polite silence. The guests, hungry and slightly bored by Justin's self-aggrandizing toast, turned their attention to the stage. It was time for the entertainment. The schedule, printed on thick cream cardstock with gold lettering, promised a performance by the Velvet Sound, a 12-piece swing band flown in from New York City. Their fee alone was $25,000. They were the heartbeat of the party, the element Brittany had bragged about for months on social media. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight swept across the room and landed on the velvet curtains at the far end of the hall. The drums were supposed to roll. The brass section was supposed to blast a triumphant opening note. Instead, there was a loud, high-pitched squeal of audio feedback. It pierced the air like a dentist's drill. Guests covered their ears. Brittany winced, her hand flying to her diamond necklace. Then the curtains parted. There was no 12-piece band. There were no men in tuxedos holding saxophones. The stage was empty, stripped bare of the drum risers and the grand piano. In the center of the vast polished wood floor sat a single object. It was a battered, rusty PA speaker, the kind you might find at a high school field day in the 80s. It sat precariously on a metal folding chair. A loose wire dangled from the back, taped together with silver duct tape. The room went dead silent. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses. Then the speaker crackled to life. It did not play the upbeat jazz standard Brittany had selected for their entrance. It played a slow, distorted organ melody. It was unmistakable. It was the Funeral March by Chopin. The heavy, mournful notes lumbered through the expensive sound system of the ballroom, filling the space with a suffocating sense of doom. Brittany dropped her champagne flute. It shattered on the floor, the sound lost under the oppressive weight of the dirge. She spun around to face Justin, her face a mask of pure horror. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice rising in panic. "Where is the band? Where are the Velvet Sound? Why is there a garbage speaker on my stage?" Justin looked like he had been slapped. He stood up, knocking his chair over. He looked at the stage, then at the confused guests who were whispering behind their hands. "I do not know," he stammered. "I confirmed with them yesterday. They were in the green room." He waved frantically at the wedding planner, Claudia, who was standing in the shadows near the kitchen. She looked just as pale as he did. She was tapping furiously on her tablet, shaking her head. "Turn it off," Brittany shrieked. "Turn that music off! It sounds like someone died." "This is a wedding, Justin. Fix it." Justin grabbed a napkin and wiped sweat from his forehead. "It is just a mistake, babe," he said, though his voice lacked any conviction. "It is a technical glitch. Maybe the band is playing a joke. You know, an avant-garde entrance." He tried to smile at the table of influencers near the front. "Just a little mix-up, folks," he called out, laughing nervously. "The real show is starting in a second." But the music did not stop. It got louder. The mournful drone of the organ seemed to seep into the walls. The guests stopped smiling. The atmosphere shifted from celebration to unease. It felt like a wake. I watched from the doorway, hidden by the shadows. I adjusted my cufflink. It was not a glitch. I had personally fired the Velvet Sound 20 minutes ago. I had paid their cancellation fee and sent them back to New York. And I had personally selected the playlist on the old iPod connected to that speaker. My son had threatened to tell the world I was dead. He wanted to use my death as a prop for his sympathy. I figured if he wanted a funeral, I should provide the soundtrack. Justin ran toward the stage, signaling for security to cut the power. But the security guards, my security guards, did not move. They stood with their arms crossed, watching the groom panic with stone-faced indifference. Brittany grabbed Justin's arm, her nails digging into his tuxedo jacket. "Do something," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "You are ruining my brand. Make it stop." Justin looked around the room, desperate for a savior. He looked at the Vanderbilts, who were staring at the empty stage with open mouths. He looked at his friends, but there was no one to help him. The checkbook was closed. The real show had just begun. I took a deep breath. The funeral march was reaching its crescendo. It was my cue. I stepped out of the shadows and into the light. The heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom swung open, with a slow, deliberate weight that commanded attention. The funeral march, which had been droning on from the lone speaker on the stage, finally cut out, replaced by a sudden, suffocating silence. 200 heads turned in unison. They were expecting the band to finally arrive. They were expecting a solution to the awkwardness. Instead, they got me. I stepped across the threshold and into the golden light of the chandeliers. I was not wearing my grease-stained coveralls. I was not wearing the flannel shirt with the frayed collar that Justin despised. I was wearing a midnight blue tuxedo custom-tailored by a master in Milan. The wool was so fine it absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. The lapels were black silk, sharp enough to cut glass. My shirt was crisp white Egyptian cotton, and my cufflinks were solid platinum, simple, understated, and worth more than the engagement ring on Brittany's finger. I did not walk alone. Flanking me in a diamond formation were 4 men who looked like they were carved out of granite. They wore matching black suits, earpieces coiling down their necks, and expressions of absolute professional indifference. These were not the resort security guards. These were private contractors, men who had protected diplomats and heads of state. They moved with me, matching my stride, their eyes scanning the room for threats. Behind them walked Leonard, my attorney, carrying a thick leather briefcase that contained the paperwork for the evening's execution. I walked down the center aisle. The sound of my Italian leather shoes striking the floor was rhythmic and confident. It was the walk of a man who owned the ground beneath his feet. I kept my chin up, my eyes locked on the stage where my son stood frozen. A ripple of whispers broke out across the room. I could hear them as I passed the tables. "Who is that?" someone whispered. "Is that a senator?" another asked. "He looks important." They did not recognize me. Even the few people who had met me briefly during the engagement process squinted in confusion. They could not reconcile the image of the sad, poor old man they had been told about, with the Titan walking toward the head table. I saw the Vanderbilts sitting at the front. Mr. Vanderbilt dropped his fork. His mouth hung open. He recognized the suit. He recognized the way I carried myself. For the first time, he looked frightened. He realized that the man he had forced to pay for dinner was not a victim, but a predator playing with his food. Mrs. Vanderbilt clutched her pearls, her face draining of color. But it was Justin who reacted the most violently. He stood at the edge of the stage, his hands gripping the railing until his knuckles turned white. He squinted against the spotlight, trying to make sense of the figure approaching him. When he finally realized it was me, his shock turned instantly to a blinding rage. He did not see the expensive suit. He did not see the power. He only saw the father he had banned, disobeying a direct order. He vaulted off the stage, landing clumsily on the dance floor. He rushed toward me, his face twisted into a snarl. His rental tuxedo looked cheap and ill-fitting compared to mine. He looked like a boy playing dress-up, while I looked like the man who owned the costume shop. "Security!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Where is security? Get this man out of here! He is crashing the party!" He stormed down the aisle, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. "What do you think you are doing?" he hissed when he was 10 feet away. "I told you not to come. I told you that you were not welcome. Look at you. You rented a suit to try and impress these people. You look ridiculous. Get out before I have you dragged out. You are ruining everything." He lunged forward, reaching out to grab the lapel of my jacket. He wanted to shake me. He wanted to physically throw me out of the room to reassert his dominance. He never touched me. One of my bodyguards, a man named Stone, who was 6'5" and built like a tank, stepped in front of me with the speed of a striking cobra. He did not hit Justin. He simply became an immovable wall. Justin slammed into Stone's chest and bounced off, stumbling backward. "Do not touch him," Stone said. His voice was low, a deep rumble that vibrated in the floorboards. "Step back." Justin looked at Stone, then at me. He was bewildered. He looked around for the resort security, expecting them to come to his aid. He saw the head of resort security standing by the wall, arms crossed, watching the scene with a bored expression. "Why aren't you doing anything?" Justin screamed at the resort staff. "I am the groom. I am paying for this. Throw them out. Throw them." I took a step forward, moving past my bodyguard, until I was face to face with my son. I could smell the fear sweating off him mixed with the cheap cologne he wore. I looked him in the eyes, and I saw nothing. No love, no respect. Just panic and greed. "You are not paying for anything, Justin," I said, my voice calm but projecting clearly to the silent room. "You have never paid for anything in your life." Justin laughed, a frantic, hysterical sound. "Go home, Dad. Go back to your garage. You are drunk. You are senile. You do not know what is happening." I fixed my cuffs. I looked at him with a pity that was colder than hate. "I know exactly what is happening, son," I said. "I am not crashing your party. I am upgrading it. And I think it is time everyone knew exactly who is picking up the tab." I signaled to Leonard. He stepped forward and handed me a microphone that he had pulled from his briefcase. I turned away from my son, leaving him standing there impotent and confused. I walked toward the stage. My bodyguards parted the sea of stunned guests, clearing a path for me. Justin tried to follow, but Stone simply stepped in his path again, blocking his way. "Let him speak," Stone said. I climbed the stairs to the stage. I stood in the center where the band should have been. I looked out at the sea of faces, at the bride who was trembling in her designer dress, at the in-laws who were realizing their con was up. I raised the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," I said. "My name is William Harrington, and I have a few things to say before we cut the cake." Justin was turning purple. The veins in his neck bulged against the collar of his rental shirt as he screamed at the head of resort security. The man's name was Evans. He was a former military police officer with a scar running through his left eyebrow and a demeanor that suggested he had seen things far worse than a groom having a tantrum. Justin pointed a shaking finger at me and then at my bodyguards. "Evans," he shrieked, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Do your job! Remove these intruders! I am paying $50,000 for this venue. I demand you throw this old man out into the snow. If you do not, I will sue this resort into bankruptcy. I will have your badge. I will ruin you." The room was deathly quiet. The guests watched with bated breath, waiting for the violence. They expected Evans to reach for his radio to call for backup, to tackle the old man in the tuxedo. Brittany stood behind Justin, nodding frantically, her eyes wide with malicious anticipation. She wanted to see me humiliated. She wanted to see me dragged away so she could salvage her perfect night. Evans stepped forward. He walked past Justin without even looking at him. It was as if my son were a ghost, a minor annoyance buzzing in the background. Justin reached out to grab Evans's arm, but the security chief shook him off with a casual shrug that sent Justin stumbling back against the head table. Evans stopped 3 feet in front of me. He stood at attention. His back was straight, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked me in the eye with absolute deference. Then slowly and deliberately he bowed his head. "Good evening, Mr. Harrington," Evans said, his voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. "Welcome to Silver Peaks. We have secured the perimeter as per your instructions. The facility is yours." Justin froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Brittany dropped her clutch. The sound of it hitting the floor was the only noise in the cavernous room. Chairman Harrington Evans corrected himself, looking up at me. I apologize. We updated the protocols this morning. Welcome home, Mr. Chairman. Justin let out a strangled laugh. It was the sound of a mind snapping under the weight of a reality it could not process. Chairman, he sputtered. What are you talking about, Evans? He is a mechanic. He drives a 20-year-old truck. He lives in a shack. He is senile. He thinks he is someone else. Throw him out before he hurts himself. I stepped around Evans and walked up to my son. I was close enough to see the sweat beading on his upper lip. I was close enough to see the terror behind the arrogance. I am not senile, Justin, I said, my voice low and steady. And I am not a guest. I turned to the crowd. I looked at the Vanderbilts, who were shrinking into their chairs. I looked at the influencers who had lowered their phones, sensing that the vibe had shifted from celebration to execution. 3 days ago, I continued my voice booming. Without the need for a microphone, I acquired a controlling interest in the Silver Peaks Hospitality Group. I bought the debt. I bought the stock. I bought the land we are standing on. I looked back at Justin. You are not kicking me out of your wedding, son. You are trespassing in my living room. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, gripping the edge of the table for support. You bought the resort, he whispered. I bought the chain, I corrected him. 12 properties across 3 states. It cost me $65 million. It was a liquid asset transfer from the sale of my logistics company. You know, the company you thought went bankrupt in the 90s because I never told you otherwise. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded document. It was the deed of ownership, stamped and notarized. I tossed it onto the table next to the wedding cake. It landed with a heavy thud. You see, Justin, I said. I decided that if I was going to pay for the party, I might as well own the venue. That way I do not have to worry about the dress code. Brittany let out a sob. She looked at the walls of the ballroom, the crystal chandeliers, the velvet curtains. A moment ago, this place had been her kingdom. Now it was a prison owned by the man she had forced to stand in the rain. This is insane, she cried. You are lying. You cannot have that kind of money. You are a nobody. I am the man who signed your checks, I said, looking at her coldly. I am the man who paid for your dress. I am the man who paid for your flowers. And now I am the landlord who is about to evict you. I turned to Evans. Mr. Evans, I said. Yes, Mr. Chairman. Please ensure all the exits are barred. No one leaves until I have finished my presentation. And cut the Wi-Fi. I do not want anyone streaming this. This is a private family matter now. Evans nodded and spoke into his wrist microphone. The heavy doors at the back of the room clicked shut. The lights flickered once, then steadied. The room was sealed. Justin looked around frantically. He was trapped. He was trapped in a room full of strangers, trapped in a lie that had just unraveled, and trapped with a father he had underestimated for his entire life. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw the boy I used to know, the boy who was afraid of the dark. But I did not comfort him. I did not reach out. That boy was gone, replaced by a thief and a liar. Sit down, Justin, I ordered, pointing to a chair in the front row. He sat. He collapsed into the chair, his legs giving out. Brittany sat next to him, weeping into her hands. The Vanderbilts sat like statues, terrified to move. I walked to the center of the stage. I buttoned my jacket. I looked out at the audience, my audience. Thank you all for coming, I said. I know you were promised a wedding. I know you were promised romance. I am afraid we are going to have to make a slight change to the program. I signaled to Leonard, who was standing by the projector. Tonight, we are not celebrating a union, I said. We are conducting an audit. And everyone here is going to see the balance sheet. Leonard hit a button. The giant screen behind me descended from the ceiling. The room went dark save for the bright white light of the projector beam. "Let us begin," I said. The first slide appeared on the screen. It was not a photo of the happy couple. It was a scan of a letter. The letter banning me from the wedding. The letter demanding $180,000. The crowd gasped. I heard murmurs of shock. I smiled. It was the smile of a shark in a pool of tuna. "Welcome to the real wedding reception," I said. "I hope you are all comfortable. We have a lot to get through." I stood center stage, the microphone heavy and cold in my hand. The feedback whine had faded, replaced by a silence so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing down on the room. 200 people stared at me. They were strangers, mostly faces rented for the day, to fill out my son's fantasy of popularity, but in this moment, they were the jury. Justin sat in the front row, slumped in his chair like a marionette whose strings had been cut. His face was pale, the color of old ash. He stared up at me, his eyes wide and glassy, unable to look away. He knew what was coming, or maybe he just feared it, but he was powerless to stop it. He was a passenger in a car wreck, watching the wall approach in slow motion. I did not scream. I did not rage. I simply looked out at the sea of designer dresses and rented tuxedos and spoke with the quiet authority of a man who had spent 40 years commanding boardrooms. "You were all invited here to witness a union." I said, my voice amplified and clear, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You were told this was a celebration of love, a merging of two illustrious families. But I am afraid you have been misled. This is not a wedding. It is a transaction. And like any good businessman, I believe in transparency." I nodded to Leonard, who stood in the shadows by the AV console. He pressed a button. The massive screen behind me flickered to life. A beam of white light cut through the darkness, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The image that appeared was not a romantic montage of the couple. It was not a slideshow of their childhoods. It was a high-resolution scan of a letter. The letter. The text was blown up to 10 feet tall, crisp and undeniable. The header read, "Wedding Protocol." The first paragraph detailed my banishment, citing aesthetic incompatibility. The second page displayed next to it was the invoice. Venue $50,000. Dress $15,000. Honeymoon $30,000. Total due $180,000. And at the bottom, highlighted in a brutal red box, was the handwritten note my son, Shimon, had scrawled with his own hand. "Be thankful I am letting you contribute." A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. It started in the front rows and rippled back like a wave. Hands flew to mouths. Whispers erupted sharp and shocked. I saw a woman in a sequined gown lean forward, squinting at the screen, then look at Justin with pure disgust. I saw a man shake his head, murmuring to his wife. They were reading the price tag of my son's love. I turned to look at the screen, letting the image burn into their retinas. "This is the invitation I received," I told them, pointing at the glowing words. My son told me I was too blue-collar to attend. He told me I would embarrass him, but he had no problem asking for my life savings to pay for the party I was not allowed to enter. I looked down at Justin. He was shaking. He was trying to make himself small, trying to disappear into the upholstery of the chair. But there was nowhere to hide. The truth was 10 feet tall and shining right above his head. $180,000, I continued, my voice dropping an octave. That is the cost of admission to this room. That is the price he put on his father's dignity. He told me to sell my house. He told me to cash out my pension. He told me to be grateful for the opportunity to go broke so he could look rich for all of you. I paused, letting the shame settle over him like a shroud. "But I am not broke," I said. "And I am not grateful." I signaled Leonard again with a sharp nod. The image on the screen flickered and changed. The invoice vanished, replaced by a string of text message screenshots. They were blown up so large that even the servers standing by the kitchen doors could read them. These were not the messages of a loving son checking in on his elderly father. These were the digital footprints of his contempt. "Read them," I commanded the room, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Read what the groom really thinks of his family." The texts were brutal. One dated 3 weeks ago read, "Dad, stop calling me about your hip pain. I do not care. Just send the wire transfer." Another from the night of the rehearsal dinner read, "You are an embarrassment. Stay in your hole. Nobody wants to see your old face." And the final one, sent just 2 days ago, read, "You are expired goods, old man. Just write the check and die already so I can get the rest." A woman in the second row audibly sobbed. Justin covered his face with his hands. He could not look at the screen. He could not look at me. He was drowning in his own malice, exposed for the world to see. Expired goods. I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. That is what my son calls the man who taught him to walk. That is what he calls the man who paid for his education. To him, I am just inventory that has gone bad. I turned my gaze to the front table where the Vanderbilts sat frozen in terror. Their faces were pale, the color of old parchment. "But my son is not the only liar in the room," I said, turning back to the audience. "He thought he was marrying into American royalty. He thought he was merging his brand with the illustrious Vanderbilt dynasty." I clicked the remote myself this time. The screen flashed white, then populated with a new set of images. These were not text messages. These were mugshots. There was Mr. Vanderbilt, or rather Gerald Miller, staring bleary-eyed into a police camera in Tampa, holding a slate with a booking number. Next to him was Mrs. Vanderbilt, Susan Miller, looking disheveled and angry in a booking photo from Miami. Surrounding their faces were documents, official government documents, foreclosure notices on a rental property in Florida, bankruptcy filings from 3 different states, and in the center, large and undeniable copies of active arrest warrants for check fraud and identity theft. The room erupted. It was chaos. People were standing up, pointing, taking photos of the screen. The facade of the high society wedding had shattered completely, leaving only the ugly, jagged shards of the truth. "Meet the Millers," I said, my voice booming over the commotion. "They are not billionaires. They are fugitives. They are not here to celebrate a marriage. They are here to find a mark. And they thought they found one in my son." I looked down at Justin. He was staring at the mugshots, his mouth hanging open. He looked at Brittany. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the exits, calculating her odds of escape. "You wanted a spectacle," I said, walking to the edge of the stage, looking down at the wreckage of their vanity. "You wanted everyone to talk about this day for years to come. You wanted the wedding of the century." I dropped the microphone to my side. "Well, congratulations," I said. "I am giving you the lesson of the century." The silence that had held the room captive shattered into a million jagged pieces. It started with a low murmur, a rumble of confusion that quickly swelled into a roar of disbelief. The spell was broken. The carefully curated atmosphere of high society evaporated, leaving behind the raw, ugly scent of scandal. And just like sharks sensing blood in the water, the crowd turned. The influencers, the ones Brittany had courted so desperately, did not look away in polite embarrassment. They did exactly what they were trained to do. They pulled out their phones. 100 screens lit up in the darkness, like fireflies, all pointed at the stage, all pointed at the screen, all pointed at the wreckage of my son's life. They were not live streaming a wedding anymore. They were live streaming a train wreck. I saw a young woman in a backless gold dress, holding her phone high, laughing as she narrated the chaos to her followers. #weddingfail, #scammer alert. The few guests who actually had money, the ones Justin had somehow tricked into attending, stood up with a synchronized motion of disgust. A man in the third row, a real estate developer I recognized from the trades, threw his napkin onto the table. He looked at Mr. Vanderbilt, who was now trying to hide his face behind a menu with pure contempt. "I cannot believe I wasted a Saturday on these grifters," he announced loudly. He grabbed his wife's hand. "Let us go, I need a shower." The exits became a bottleneck of expensive fabrics and indignant egos. They were not leaving quietly. They were leaving with the righteous anger of people who had been duped. I heard laughter, cruel and sharp, cutting through the air. They were laughing at the fake watches. They were laughing at the foreclosure notices. They were laughing at the sheer audacity of the lie. I looked down at the head table. The Vanderbilts, the so-called royalty of Tampa, were crumbling. Mr. Vanderbilt Gerald Miller was slumped in his chair, his face a mask of gray terror. He knew what those warrants on the screen meant. He knew that the moment he stepped out of this room, his freedom was over. He looked at the exits, calculating his chances, but saw my security guards standing like statues blocking the way. Mrs. Vanderbilt Susan was weeping not with sorrow, but with the frantic, gasping sobs of a cornered animal. She tried to pull her fur stole over her head, trying to disappear, trying to block out the flashing lights of the phones that were documenting her downfall. They had spent a lifetime running from the truth, moving from city to city, reinventing themselves, leaving a trail of bad debts and broken promises. But here in this ballroom, under the unforgiving glare of the projector, there was nowhere left to run. The truth had caught them, and it was broadcasting their faces in high definition. I stood on the stage watching the exodus. I did not feel triumph. I felt a cold, heavy finality. I had stripped them naked in front of the world. I had taken their pride, their lies, their future, and I had burned it all to ash in under 5 minutes. The room was emptying, leaving only the guilty behind, trapped in the wreckage of their own making. The laughter of the fleeing guests had faded, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than the noise. The ballroom was now a cavern of judgment, inhabited only by the guilty and the executioners. I stepped back from the microphone and nodded to Leonard. It was his turn now. He did not walk with my swagger. He walked with the terrifying precision of a machine that had been programmed to destroy. He placed his leather briefcase on the cake table, pushing aside a tray of untouched silver forks. The click of the latches opening echoed in the empty room like the cocking of a gun. Leonard pulled out a single document. It was the addendum. The same piece of paper that Justin and Brittany had signed in the wedding planner's office while they were too busy taking selfies to read the fine print. Leonard adjusted his glasses and looked at Justin, who was still slumped in his chair, looking like a man who had just survived a plane crash, only to realize he was stranded in a desert. "Mr. Justin Harrington." Leonard began, his voice dry and devoid of any sympathy. "As per the addendum attached to the vendor contracts which you signed and initialed on the 16th of this month, my client, Mr. William Harrington, is exercising his right under Clause 4A. Justin looked up, his eyes red and swollen. "What does that mean?" he croaked. "It means," Leonard continued, "that Mr. Harrington is officially invoking the unilateral cancellation of all funding. Effective immediately, he is withdrawing his financial backing for this event. He is revoking the payments for the venue, the catering, the floral arrangements, and the entertainment." Brittany let out a sharp gasp. "But you cannot do that," she screamed. "The money is already spent. We ate the food. We drank the champagne. You cannot just take it back." Leonard turned to her with a thin, icy smile. "Actually, we can. The contract states that in the event of a funding withdrawal, the liability for all incurred costs reverts instantly to the secondary signatories. That would be you, Mr. Harrington, and you, Mrs. Miller." Justin stood up, his legs shaking. "Wait, are you saying I have to pay? I do not have any money." "You know I do not have any money." "It gets worse," Leonard said, flipping a page. "Since my client, Mr. Harrington, is now the owner of the Silver Peaks Resort Group, he is technically the vendor you owe. And since he has already advanced $230,000 to cover these costs, He has instructed me to reclassify those payments. Leonard held up the paper showing the signature that Justin had scribbled so carelessly. This document converts any revoked funding into a personal loan, Leonard explained. A secured personal loan. By signing this, you agreed that if my client withdrew his gift, the amount would become a debt obligation carrying an interest rate of 8% compounded monthly. I watched the color drain from Justin's face until he looked like a ghost. He did the math in his head, $230,000, plus the $50,000 he borrowed from the loan shark I now owned, plus the interest. He was looking at nearly $300,000 of debt. He was 32 years old, and he was starting his life with a financial death sentence. I did not give you that money, Justin, I said, stepping forward, my voice soft but filling the room. I lent it to you, and now I am calling in the loan. But Dad. Justin pleaded, tears streaming down his face. This is bankruptcy. You are burying me. I will never pay this off. I work in sales. I make 40 grand a year. This will ruin me. I looked at him. I looked at the son who had threatened to tell the world I was dead. I looked at the son who had stolen from my emergency fund. You wanted to be a big shot, son, I said. You wanted to live like a Vanderbilt. Well, this is how the real world works. You signed the paper. You bought the ride. Now you have to pay the toll. Leonard closed the briefcase. The sound was final, like a cell door slamming shut. We will be garnishing your wages starting next month, Leonard added, and we will be placing a lien on your car. And since you listed your future inheritance as collateral for that other loan, we will be freezing any assets you thought you might get, which as of this morning is absolutely nothing. Justin collapsed back into the chair. He put his head in his hands and began to sob. It wasn't the crying of a child. It was the broken weeping of a man who realized he had sold his soul and didn't even get to keep the change. I watched him for a moment, feeling a distant pang of pity, but I crushed it instantly. He had dug this hole with a shovel made of greed. I was just the one filling it back in. The show was over and the lesson had been delivered, so now it was time to close the theater. I looked at Evans, the head of security, and gave a subtle nod. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. It was a sharp sound that echoed in the emptiness of the ballroom. Immediately, the side doors swung open and a brigade of waitstaff marched in. They were not moving with the deferential grace of servers at a wedding. They moved with the efficient, brutal speed of a cleanup crew at a crime scene. They did not ask permission. They did not apologize. They simply began to erase the party. I watched as a waiter in a black vest walked up to the head table where the Vanderbilts were still sitting in stunned silence. Mr. Vanderbilt was staring at a plate of untouched lobster thermidor. He had not eaten in hours, and despite the terror of the arrest warrants, his hand drifted instinctively toward the fork. He was a grifter, and grifters never let a free meal go to waste, even when their world is burning. But before his fingers could touch the silver, the waiter snatched the plate away. "Excuse me," Mr. Vanderbilt protested, his voice weak and raspy. "I was going to eat that." "I am afraid that is property of the resort, sir," the waiter said coldly. "And since the account has been suspended, all food and beverage service is terminated immediately." The waiter stacked the plate on a tray, along with the crystal wineglasses that were still half full of vintage Cabernet. Mrs. Vanderbilt reached for a bread roll, her hand trembling. Another waiter swept the entire bread basket off the table before she could grab a crumb. It was humiliating. It was petty. And it was exactly what they deserved. They were being starved in the middle of a banquet they had tried to steal. Over by the stage, two large men were dismantling the wedding cake. It was a 6-tier masterpiece covered in sugar flowers that had cost $4,000. It had not even been cut yet. Brittany watched with hollow eyes as they lifted the heavy tiers onto a metal rolling cart. She looked like she wanted to scream, to throw herself in front of the cart, to save the symbol of her perfect day, but she did not move. She had no fight left. She just watched as the cake was wheeled toward the kitchen, disappearing behind the swinging doors like a corpse being taken to the morgue. Then came the decorations. The florists stripped the centerpieces from the tables, tossing the expensive white orchids into black trash bags. The silk table runners were ripped off. The candles were blown out, one by one, sending thin trails of gray smoke drifting up toward the ceiling. The room smelled of extinguished wax and failure. Within 10 minutes, the ballroom was stripped bare. The linens were gone. The food was gone. The music was gone. All that remained were the 4 guilty people sitting on folding chairs in the middle of a vast empty wooden floor, surrounded by the debris of their own lies. I checked my watch. It was time. "Kill it," I said to Evans. Evans spoke into his headset. "Cut the main breaker." There was a heavy mechanical clunk from the control room. Then the massive crystal chandeliers above us flickered. The golden warm light that had bathed the room in a soft, forgiving glow sputtered and died. Total darkness fell like a hammer. It was not just dim, it was pitch black. The kind of heavy, suffocating darkness you only get in the mountains when the moon is hidden. The expansive windows which had looked out on the ski slopes were now just black squares reflecting the nothingness inside. I heard Brittany gasp. I heard Justin shift in his chair, his rental shoes scraping against the wood. "Dad," Justin called out, his voice shaking in the dark. "Dad, please, I cannot see anything. Turn the lights back on. This isn't funny." I did not answer. I stood in the darkness near the exit, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. I could see their outlines huddled together for warmth. The heating system had been shut off along with the lights, and the temperature in the room was already dropping rapidly. The aspen chill was creeping in, seeping through their thin clothes. They were alone. They were in the dark. And for the first time in their lives, they were completely exposed. The glamour was gone. The audience was gone. The money was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard reality of who they really were. I pushed open the heavy exit door, letting in a slice of gray hallway light. I did not look back. I stepped through and let the door click shut behind me, sealing them in the tomb they had built for themselves. The heavy thud of the exit door closing sealed them inside the ballroom, like insects trapped in a jar. The main lights were dead, leaving only the sickly green glow of the emergency exit signs casting long, distorted shadows across the empty wooden floor. The temperature was already plummeting, the mountain air seeping through the vents, now that the heating system was silent. For a moment, there was only the sound of ragged breathing. Then the explosion happened. It started with a low growl from Mr. Vanderbilt, the man who had spent the last 3 hours drinking vintage wine and pretending to be a European aristocrat, suddenly shed his skin. He lunged across the few feet of darkness separating him from Justin. His heavy hands clamped onto the lapels of Justin's cheap rental tuxedo, and he slammed my son against the wall. "You lied to us," the older man screamed, his voice ragged with panic. "You said you were an heir. You said you had access to the family trust. You told me you were worth millions." Justin struggled, trying to push the heavy man off him, but he was weak from shock. "Get off me," he gasped. "I never said I had millions. I said my dad had money. I thought you were the ones with the fortune. I thought you were paying for the honeymoon." Mr. Vanderbilt slapped him. It was a clumsy, desperate blow that cracked across Justin's face. "You useless little parasite," Vanderbilt roared. "We are broke. We have nothing. We were counting on you to bail us out. We needed your signature to pay off the sharks in Florida. You were supposed to be the golden ticket." Mrs. Vanderbilt joined in her voice a shrill shriek in the darkness. "You ruined us," she yelled, clawing at Justin's arm. "We have arrest warrants waiting for us outside. We are going to prison because of you. You led us into a trap." Justin shoved Mr. Vanderbilt back hard enough that the older man tripped over a folding chair and sprawled onto the floor. Justin stood there, chest heaving, wiping blood from his lip. He looked at the two frauds groveling on the floor, and then he turned his eyes to Brittany. She was standing near the empty spot where the cake had been shivering in her $15,000 dress. She looked at him with a mixture of fear and disgust. "Do not look at me like that," Justin hissed. "You are a loser," Brittany spat out, her voice venomous even in defeat. "My parents are right. You are a fraud. You promised me a life of luxury. You promised me the world. And look at you. You are nothing but a broke mechanic's son with $300,000 of debt. You tricked me." Something inside Justin finally snapped. The years of trying to please her, the years of maxing out credit cards to buy her affection, the years of treating his own father like garbage just to make her smile, it all boiled over into a blinding, white-hot rage. He realized in that moment that he had burned a bridge to a man worth $60 million for a woman who only loved a reflection in a mirror. He rushed at her. He did not see his wife. He saw the architect of his destruction. He saw the voice that had whispered in his ear to ban his father. He saw the reason he was destitute. He grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her violently. "It was you," he screamed, saliva flying from his mouth. "It was all you. You made me hate him. You told me he was embarrassing. You told me he smelled like grease." He raised his hand and struck her. The sound of the slap echoed brutally in the empty cavern of the ballroom. Brittany fell back, clutching her cheek, screaming in shock. "My father is a billionaire." Justin howled, his voice breaking into a sob. "He owns this whole damn chain. He had the money all along. And because of you, because of your snobbery and your obsession with appearances, I treated him like dirt. I could have had it all, Brittany. We could have had the empire. But you wanted a Vogue wedding so bad that you made me throw away my own father." He looked down at his hands, shaking uncontrollably. "I hate you," he whispered, his voice echoing in the cold, dark room. "I hate all of you." The four of them stood there in the wreckage, the Vanderbilts on the floor, Brittany weeping on her knees, and Justin standing over them alone in the dark. They were a family of wolves who had finally run out of prey and had turned to tearing each other apart. Outside, the wind howled against the glass, but it was nothing compared to the storm of regret and hatred raging inside. The screams of the fighting family were cut short by a sound that instantly paralyzed the room. It was not the sound of wind or the creaking of the building. It was the sound of heavy boots hitting the floorboards. The double doors at the main entrance burst open with a violence that shook the walls. Beams of blinding white light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the empty ballroom like searchlights hunting for escaped prisoners. "Police," a voice boomed, amplified and authoritative. "Everybody on the ground. Hands where we can see them. Now." The lights of the ballroom suddenly flickered back to life, but there was no warmth in them anymore. The harsh fluorescent setting revealed the ugly tableau in stark clarity. Mr. Vanderbilt was sprawled on the floor, his tuxedo torn. Mrs. Vanderbilt was cowering in the corner, mascara running down her face. Brittany was clutching her swelling cheek. And Justin stood in the center of it all, fists clenched, chest heaving, looking like a man who had lost his mind. A squad of deputies from the Pitkin County Sheriff's Department swarmed the room. They did not care about the expensive suits or the lingering scent of expensive perfume. They moved with tactical precision. Two officers headed straight for Mr. Vanderbilt. Gerald Miller, the lead officer, shouted, pulling the older man up by his arm before spinning him around and slamming him against the wall. "You are under arrest." Mr. Vanderbilt tried to struggle. "There is a mistake," he sputtered, his voice high and fearful. "My name is Vanderbilt. I am a guest here. We have a warrant from the state of Florida for Gerald Miller regarding multiple counts of wire fraud and identity theft," the officer said, snapping the handcuffs onto his wrists. The metal clicked shut with a sound that signaled the end of the charade. "You can explain your name to the judge." Mrs. Vanderbilt let out a wail as a female officer approached her. She did not fight. She simply collapsed, letting the officer cuff her as she sobbed about her blood pressure. Justin stood frozen, watching his in-laws being detained. He looked at the police, and then a look of relief washed over his face. He thought they were there to save him. He thought he could spin this. "Officer," he called out, stepping forward and raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Thank God you are here. These people are crazy. They are con artists. They attacked me. I want to press charges." The third officer, a burly man with a thick mustache, did not smile. He walked right up to Justin and grabbed his wrist, twisting it behind his back in one fluid motion. "Justin Harrington," the officer said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are under arrest." Justin yelped in pain. "What are you doing?" he screamed. "I am the victim. They scammed me. I didn't do anything." "You are under arrest for forgery and bank fraud," the officer recited, tightening the cuffs until they bit into the skin. "We have a sworn affidavit from the account holder regarding a check for $20,000 that was cashed with a falsified signature." Justin's face went white. He stopped struggling. The check. The emergency fund he had stolen, thinking I was a senile old man who wouldn't notice or wouldn't dare to prosecute. And the officer added, looking at the red handprint on Brittany's face, "Given what we just walked in on, we are adding domestic assault to the charge sheet." Justin looked frantically around the room until his eyes found me. I was standing by the open doors, flanked by my security team. I had not moved. I had not said a word. I just watched. "Dad!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Dad, tell them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. You said you would pay. You cannot let them take me to jail. I am your son." I walked slowly across the floor. The sound of my shoes was the only thing audible over the squawk of the police radios. I stopped 5 feet away from him. I looked at the handcuffs. I looked at the son who had threatened to kill me off to save face. "I did not call the police because I hate you, Justin," I said, my voice quiet and calm. "I called them because you broke the law. You forged my name. You stole my money, and I am done protecting you from the consequences of your own greed." "But it is prison, Dad." He sobbed, tears streaming down his face. "It is a felony. This will ruin my life." "You ruined your life the moment you decided I was disposable," I said. I nodded to the officer. "Take him away." As they dragged him out, kicking and screaming, he passed Brittany. She did not look at him. She sat on the floor, her wedding dress ruined her face, bruised, staring at nothing. She was not arrested, but she was trapped in a ski resort owned by a man she despised, with no husband, no money, and no way home. I watched the police cars pull away, their red and blue lights flashing against the snow. It was finally over. The house was clean. The holding cell at the Pitkin County Sheriff's Station was a concrete box painted a color that could only be described as despair gray. It smelled of industrial bleach and unwashed bodies, a sharp chemical tang that burned the back of the throat. It was a far cry from the vanilla-scented air of the Vera Wang boutique, or the crisp pine breeze of the mountain resort. Justin sat on a narrow metal bench bolted to the floor. His tuxedo, the rental he had worn to play the part of the wealthy groom, was rumpled and stained with sweat. His tie hung loose around his neck like a noose he had managed to slip out of. When the heavy steel door buzzed and clicked open, he looked up. His eyes were swollen, almost shut from crying. When he saw me standing on the other side of the thick plexiglass partition, a flicker of hope ignited in his face. It was a desperate, pathetic hope. He scrambled off the bench and rushed to the glass, pressing his palms against it. "Dad," he choked out, his voice cracking. "You came. I knew you would come. Thank God. Please, you have to get me out of here. It is a nightmare in here, Dad. There is a guy in the next cell screaming at the walls. I cannot be here. I am not a criminal." I stood there calmly. I was still wearing my midnight blue custom suit. I looked like I belonged in a boardroom, while he looked like he belonged exactly where he was. I did not sit down. I did not pick up the phone handset on the wall. We could hear each other through the small metal grate in the glass. "I am not bailing you out, Justin," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the sterile room. "I came to bring you a change of clothes. The officers said they are processing you into the general population in an hour. They will take the tuxedo." Justin recoiled as if I had slapped him. "No, no, no," he stammered. "You cannot leave me here. You have the money now. I saw the papers. You own the resort. You have millions. Paying the bail would be like buying a cup of coffee for you. Why are you doing this to me?" He slammed his fist against the glass. "Why didn't you tell me?" he screamed, the tears starting to flow again. "Why did you let me think you were poor? If I had known you were the chairman, if I had known you were sitting on a fortune, none of this would have happened. We could have been partners, Dad. I would have treated you like a king. I would have given you the seat of honor at the wedding. Why did you lie to me?" I looked at him and I felt a profound sadness. He still did not get it. Even now, sitting in a cage, he thought the problem was a lack of information, not a lack of character. "That is exactly why I didn't tell you, Justin," I said, leaning in closer to the grate. "Because I needed to know who you were when there was nothing to gain. If I had told you I was rich, you would have been the perfect son. You would have visited me every week. You would have poured my coffee. You would have let me hold your children. But it would not have been love. It would have been an investment strategy." I paused, watching the realization slowly sink into his eyes. "I wanted to be loved for being your father," I continued, "not for being your bank. And you showed me the truth. You treated a poor father like garbage to be thrown out. You threatened to kill me off because you thought I had no value. The money did not change me, son. It just revealed you." Justin slid down the glass until he was kneeling on the dirty floor. He put his head in his hands. "I am sorry," he sobbed, his voice muffled. "I am so sorry, Dad. Please give me another chance. I will change. I promise." I looked at the boy I had raised. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike. I remembered the day he graduated. But I also remembered the text messages calling me expired goods. I remembered the stolen check. "Some things cannot be fixed," I said. "You committed a crime, Justin. You stole from me. You assaulted a woman. Those are choices you made. Now you have to live in the world you built." I turned to leave. Leonard was waiting for me in the hallway, holding a garment bag with a pair of jeans and a t-shirt for Justin. "Dad, wait!" Justin screamed, scrambling up. "Do not walk away. What am I going to do? I have nothing. I am $300,000 in debt. My life is over." I stopped at the door. I looked back at him one last time. "You are young," I said. "You have your health. And you have a very long time to think about the value of $1. I suggest you start by saving your prison wages. I hear it is 20 cents an hour." I walked out of the room. I heard him screaming my name, pounding on the glass, but I did not stop. I walked out into the cool night air where my car was waiting. I had a resort to manage. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely free. The fluorescent lights of the visitation room hummed with a low electric buzz that seemed to drill into my skull. Justin was still pressing his face against the glass, his breath fogging up the barrier between us. He looked at me with eyes that were red and desperate, but there was still a spark of defiance in them. He was still trying to negotiate. He was still trying to find the angle where he was the victim and I was the villain. "You are not listening to me, Dad," he pleaded, his voice thick with tears. "You set me up. You walked around looking like a hobo on purpose. You tested me. That is not fair. If you had just been honest, if you had just told me that you sold the company for millions, I would have treated you differently. I would have given you the head of the table. I would have made sure Brittany respected you. You cannot blame me for reacting to the situation you created." I looked at him and felt the last tether connecting us snap. It was a clean break. He had just admitted the very thing that made him unforgivable. He had just confirmed that his love was a commodity to be traded for value, not a gift to be given freely. I leaned forward until my forehead was almost touching the cold plexiglass. I stared deep into his eyes, searching for the little boy who used to run to the door when I came home from work, but he was gone. "That is exactly the point, Justin," I said, my voice low and steady, vibrating through the glass. "You are telling me that your respect has a price tag. You are telling me that I only deserve to be treated with dignity if I can pay for it." Justin shook his head frantically. "No, that is not what I mean. I just mean—" "Stop," I commanded, cutting him off. "Just stop. You are digging your grave deeper. You say you are not wrong because I didn't tell you I was rich. You think the crime here is my secrecy. But you are missing the lesson, son. You are not in this cell because you failed a test. You are here because of who you are when you think no one is watching." I paused, letting the words hang in the stale air. "You are wrong because you treated your father like garbage, not because he was poor, but because you are cruel. You are wrong because you looked at a man you thought had nothing and decided he was worth nothing. You mocked my clothes. You mocked my smell. You threatened to erase my existence because I was an inconvenience to your vanity. That did not happen because I hid my money. That happened because your soul is rotten." Justin flinched. He pulled back from the glass, his mouth opening and closing as he tried to find a defense, but there was none. I stood up slowly, buttoning my jacket. The fabric felt smooth under my fingers, a sharp contrast to the grim reality of the jail. "I have $52 million in a trust fund," I said, my voice flat. "I own the resort where you wanted to play Prince. I could write a check right now that would buy this entire police station. I could hire a legal team that would have you out of here in an hour. I have enough power to make this all go away." Justin's eyes lit up. He heard the power. He heard the solution. "Then do it," he begged, clasping his hands together. "Please, Dad. Just do it." I shook my head. "I can buy buildings, Justin. I can buy islands. I can buy silence. But there is one thing that all the money in the world cannot buy. It cannot buy you character. It cannot buy you a conscience. And it certainly cannot buy you the right to call me father." I turned my back on him. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, and yet it was the easiest. I was walking away from my past. "Dad, wait," Justin screamed. "Do not turn your back on me. You cannot leave me here. I am your son." I kept walking toward the heavy steel door. "Dad, come back. I am sorry. I will do anything." "Dad." His screams echoed off the concrete walls, bouncing around the small room like a trapped bird. They were the screams of a man who realized too late that he had bet everything on the wrong card. I pushed the door open and stepped out into the hallway. The heavy metal slammed shut behind me, cutting off his voice with a final decisive clang. I stood in the hallway for a moment, adjusting my cuffs. I took a deep breath of the air that smelled of floor wax and coffee. I was alone. I had no son. I had no family. But as I walked toward the exit, I realized I had something more important. I had my dignity, and that was something Justin would never be able to take from me again. It has been exactly 365 days since the lights went out in the ballroom at Silver Peaks. I am sitting on the terrace of the resort, watching the sunrise paint the snow-capped mountains in shades of gold and violet. I kept the property. I turned it into a retreat for veterans and their families. It is the only useful thing that came out of that disaster. The silence up here is peaceful, but my mind is 3,000 miles away in a gritty neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago. Justin walked out of the county correctional facility 2 days ago. He did not walk out into the arms of a loving family. He walked out with a plastic bag containing his personal effects and a felony record that will follow him for the rest of his life. He is 33 years old, and he is starting over from a place lower than zero. There was no welcome home party. There was no soft landing. I made sure of that. My legal team was waiting for him not with a hug, but with a court order. The judgment for the $300,000 he owes me was finalized months ago. I did not waive a single cent. I did not forgive the interest. The judge ordered a mandatory garnishment of his wages. Every time he earns $1.25 belongs to me. He found a job. It was not easy for a felon with a history of fraud to find work. The corporate world he desperately wanted to be part of slammed its doors in his face. The banks would not hire him. The sales firms would not touch him. So he went back to the only industry that does not ask too many questions. My son is a sanitation worker. I drove past his route this morning, just before dawn. I parked my car down the block and watched. He was wearing a neon yellow safety vest over a gray uniform. He was wearing heavy steel-toed boots. They were not the designer shoes he used to obsess over. They were work boots, cheap and durable, the kind I wore for 40 years. I watched him jump off the back of the truck. I watched him grab a heavy metal trash bin. I saw him struggle with the weight. He slipped on a patch of ice, fell hard on his knee, and got right back up. He did not complain. He did not call for a manager. He just wiped the slush off his pants and kept working. The smell of garbage surrounded him. The cold wind bit at his face. He looked tired. He looked older. But for the first time in his life, he looked real. Brittany is gone, of course. She filed for an annulment 3 days after the arrest, citing fraud. She claimed she was a victim of his deception. She didn't even visit him once while he was awaiting trial. I heard she moved to Miami. I heard she's dating a plastic surgeon who is twice her age. She found another host to attach herself to. Justin never hears from her. She erased him just like he tried to erase me. I watched the garbage truck rumble down the street. Justin looked up for a moment. He wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of a gloved hand. He looked at my car. The windows were tinted so he could not see me, but I think he knew. He stood there for a heartbeat, staring at the black sedan. He did not wave. He did not make a rude gesture. He just stared. Then he turned around, grabbed another bag of trash, and threw it into the crusher. He is paying his debt. Not just the money. He is paying for his arrogance. He is paying for his cruelty. Every morning when his alarm goes off at 4 o'clock, he has to remember why he is there. Every time his muscles ache, he has to remember the soft life he threw away. I put the car in gear and drove away. I did not stop to say hello. I did not offer him a ride. I am not his savior anymore. I am his creditor. He wanted to be a self-made man. He wanted to build a legacy. Well, now he has his chance. He is starting at the bottom just like I did. He is learning that dignity is not found in a bank account or a designer suit. Dignity is found in the work. It is found in owning your mistakes. The mountain is steep, son, and you have a very long climb ahead of you. But at least this time you are climbing it with your own 2 feet. The water of the Mediterranean is a blue that defies description. It is not the gray steel color of Lake Michigan in the winter. Nor is it the murky brown of the river that runs past the sanitation depot, where my son now spends his days. It is a deep, vibrant sapphire that looks like it is lit from within. I am sitting on the aft deck of the Catherine, named after the only woman who ever loved me for me. The teak deck is warm under my bare feet, and the air smells of salt and lemon trees drifting over from the Italian coast. I am not alone. Across from me sits Leonard wearing a linen shirt that is unbuttoned at the collar, looking more relaxed than I have ever seen him. Mike is here too, nursing a cold beer and laughing at a story about the old days, when we used to fix transmissions in a freezing garage for $20 an hour. There are no influencers here. There are no social climbers. There are no people checking their watches or their follower counts. There is just the easy, comfortable silence of men who have nothing left to prove. Leonard leans forward and pours a dark ruby liquid into my glass. It is a bottle of Chateau Margaux, the same vintage that was served at the wedding that never happened. But here on this boat, it does not taste like bitterness. It tastes like victory. "You look good," Bill Leonard says. "You look lighter." I nod, looking out at the horizon where the sea meets the sky. "I feel lighter, Leonard. For a long time I was carrying a weight that I did not even realize was crushing me. I was carrying the weight of a hope that was already dead. I was carrying the burden of a son who looked at me and saw only a target. People tell you that a parent's love is unconditional. They tell you that you should sacrifice everything for your children, that you should bleed yourself dry just to keep them warm. I used to believe that. I used to think that my job was to be the safety net that caught Justin every time he fell. But I realized something out on this water. A safety net does not help a man learn to fly. It just teaches him that gravity is optional. It teaches him that there are no consequences for failure. I did not lose a son back in Aspen. I lost a parasite. I lost a lie that had been living in my spare bedroom for 30 years. It hurts, of course. There is a phantom limb pain where my fatherhood used to be. I still wake up sometimes and wonder if he is eating, if he is warm, if he is okay. But then I remember the look on his face when he threatened to kill me off. I remember the greed, and the pain turns into a dull ache of necessity. I had to break him to save him. If I had bailed him out, if I had used my money to sweep his crimes under the rug, he would have become a monster. He would have gone through life destroying people thinking he was untouchable. Now he knows he is touchable. He knows that actions have weight. He knows that the world does not care about his last name. I took away his inheritance, but I gave him something far more valuable. I gave him reality. Mike raises his beer. To new beginnings, Bill. I pick up my wine glass. The crystal catches the sunlight, shattering it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. I look at my friends. I look at the beautiful boat that I earned with my own sweat and blood. I think about Justin lifting trash cans in the snow, and for the first time I do not feel guilt. I feel a sense of balance. The scales have finally tipped in the right direction. To the truth, I say softly. We clink glasses. The sound is a clear, pure bell note that rings out across the water. I take a sip of the wine. It is rich and complex and perfect. I lean back in my chair and close my eyes, listening to the sound of the waves slapping against the hull. I am 72 years old. I have lost a family, but I have found myself. The air is clean here. The future is open. And for the first time in a very long time, I am truly smiling. The saga of William and Justin teaches us a brutal but necessary truth. Money can buy the venue, but it cannot buy the values required to fill the room with love. Justin chased the aesthetic of success while rotting from the inside, proving that without integrity, wealth is just a costume. William's decision to withhold his fortune wasn't an act of cruelty, but a desperate bid to save his son's soul through the dignity of labor. True inheritance isn't what you leave in a bank account. It's the character you instill. Sometimes you have to let everything burn to see what is real. What do you think? Did William go too far, or was this the only way to truly save his son? Share your thoughts in the comments below.